There was genuine misunderstanding on the man's face. He nervously replied that whoever she was, he had never heard of her anyway, and this was the first time he was being questioned like this, which only increased the feeling of stress. Suddenly, someone in the wagon grabbed the bars, yanking them to better draw attention to himself and shouting for the men to wait and listen to this man, because he had something to say on the matter. And when the guards came closer to the cage and saw there a stranger in a tattered cloak, on his head was a magic circle, but his face was not visible at all, and suddenly through excitement and nerves, he answered that he could tell everything, because he knew the answer to the question that was being asked. It was very important for the guards, what he had just heard. It was his chance. That man might know something, and to miss such a chance, to reveal the secret, which might not be there at all. But suddenly the second mage on the cart, it was a girl, addressed the man very strictly, not polite at all, calling him respectable. A mad look showed from under his hood, and she began to summon magic, saying that the lord of these people must be so lazy that he dares to detain even those who are allowed passage. But their count was not at all so merciful, and then openly threatening, for she did not at all like anyone prying into their affairs, said she would give them two choices. And under the horrible spectacle of the prisoners sitting in a volcano as if they were going mad, those who were transporting them set conditions that either the guards detain them and get into a major conflict with the count, or they turn a blind eye to this nonsense and let them ride by all the rules to do their job. The choice was still up to the guards, and such threats made them nervous and think about what was happening, to choose between the rules and conscience, because these people have a pass, the rules on the occasion of this clear, and would not want to ask for a conflict, neither himself personally, nor the whole city. The guards didn't think for long. They let the cart pass without thinking that they needed to question these people and find out what was ordered. They were forced to think ahead about the fate of their place of residence without asking any questions. Elle and Rurin were sitting under a dome that from the outside looked like a soap bubble that shimmered with different colors. It was a barrier so that no one would overhear them. Regarding important matters, it was worth being overheard even in one's own home. At the moment they were discussing what they had received a reply from Mr. Rice and from Lord Lydon as well. And unfortunately no one had heard anything about the child called Selly. No one had been able to say anything at all. Rurin was very confused by this information. She couldn't believe that no one had heard anything at all. Had she come out of nowhere and no one had ever come across her? Then Elu had a rather horrifying thought. He compared the fact that the girl had found her on the outskirts of the village, and that made it even creepier. If you remembered that it was winter, the guy himself didn't want to think about it, much less the fact that it could be true. And he told her what was in his head, namely, sometimes poor people suffering from hunger just get rid of unnecessary people, but did not dare to say directly. Then the brunette and asked what it is hinted at by the guy, and she herself got goosebumps. She could not be simply abandoned. They did not want to believe it, but Allison found an explanation for the fact that the girl did not remember anything. The shock state can cause memory loss, and in this case it is really very plausible. And then he said that, of course, it was just a supposition. He wanted to hope for it, although everything was discussed so plausible that they were already more inclined to this option. But now it is worth to go to the main thing. If they still cannot find her parents, then it will have to decide where Selly will live. The question was still open. Would she stay here or would she be sent to an orphanage? And now Rurin was seriously thinking about it. She had been nurturing the thought but trying not to go back to it because it was a very hard decision to make, running away from the problem. But now the moment had come when everything had to be decided. There was only room for Rurin and Ella. They couldn't live with Selly. They wouldn't fit in here and they'd have to figure something out and share the space, which would make them more inclined to choose the shelter. But suddenly from the ceiling, or rather from the room above, there were heard strange sounds, banging and falling of something. Immediately the attention of two young people who were discussing important matters was attracted by this sound, interrupting the conversation. Immediately they began to panic. Even from the chairs sharply stood up, trying to understand what it is. And very soon came the realization that it comes from the kitchen, from the restaurant, which has long been closed for the night. If thieves, they instantly rushed to the scene. First up was a furious Rurin who was asking who dared to break in. She was a real threat if it was some intruder who wanted to do harm. She pulled back the curtain to ask who was there, hoping that whoever had decided to break in here would at least run away scared of the owners coming. But immediately Rurin's voice became quieter and she faltered when she saw who was making their own mess in the kitchen. It was Selly. She recognized with a smile that she had been caught. She had a whisk in her hands and in her plate was something that looked like dough. There were a couple drops of it on her dress. Eggshells and spilled flour were scattered around. She was cooking something. The girl blushed with embarrassment and a kind of shyness and began to justify that she ate only pancakes all the time. The little girl did not speak very confidently, afraid that she would be scolded for not saying anything, and decided to cook secretly. That's why she felt a strong desire to cook the dish herself. And now Allison remembered how Selly had been watching him, and now he could see why she had been watching so closely, with incredible interest. But it didn't change Rurin's mood very much. She wasn't so aggressive, but her tone was stern, putting her hands at her sides. The dragon began to question Selly where she could have gotten the eggs, and, a little frightened, the girl answered that when they went to look at the Palenza, that's when she took a couple. And then the brunette looked under her feet. On the floor, there were broken plates and a lot of things scattered around. In just a couple minutes the kitchen was dirty and littered. It was very annoying as the owners of the restaurant tried to keep a perfect order. Rurin's voice was very cold. She looked very menacingly straight into the child's eyes, conveying to her what she might not have understood due to her age, namely that she disobeyed, disrupted the order of this house, the conditions that were placed on her. So for the dragon in human form everything was decided. Immediately she very strictly ordered Selly to follow her, which scared the little girl very much. She didn't expect such a negative reaction. She didn't even suppose that those who treated her so well would react like that. Allison was also surprised by this reaction from Rurin, and watching the brunette lead the girl away, he realized that she had reacted in a very different way than he had expected. Of course, one could assume that the girl would be angry and testy, but not this cold. Meanwhile, in the thick of the forest, two men in ragged capes, presumably the ones who dared to raise their voices in front of the guards, were screaming in pain, trying to protect each other, sobbing. One of these men begged for the abuse to stop, saying he was truly sorry for everything, promising he would never do it again, trying to cuddle up to his companion. It was very, very painful from the baton they were being beaten with. But the bald man didn't stop scolding them, asking if they realized who they were up against, calling them real jerks. So he warned the naughty ones that if they opened their mouths again at the wrong moment, they would have their tongues cut out, so they wouldn't be able to do it again. Meanwhile, the girl who sat with him at the front of the cage and successfully threatened the guards was stretching, trying to dispel sleep and boredom, and asking her partner to be quieter with the punishment. She didn't like such a loud moment when she wanted peace and quiet. And on top of that she reminded the fact that they must not let them die even purely by accident. They didn't have that much power over them and they needed to be delivered from point to point. So the man calmed down very quickly after remembering that point. Those who had been bullied so much couldn't hold back their tears. But not only because of that, but because of the fact that they couldn't learn more and share information about Selly. And further, they began to whisper so quietly that their lips hardly moved. They got off and continued on their way. The girl noticed that the man was giving them a good kicking that they were completely silent, and her partner warned her that they were going to get their own way eventually anyway, so don't consider them re-educated for one threat. The prisoner's voice was very shaky. He quietly began to hum something, and very afraid lest his voice shake and shift to a louder tone, Rurin's words came out of his mouth, the soft, warm sunlight falling once. Meanwhile, Rurin and Selly were already somewhere outside. The older girl was leading the smaller one by the hand and was silent for a very long time. It wasn't clear if her resentment was so strong that she couldn't even say a word to her. Selly was so depressed by the atmosphere that it took her a very long time to decide to speak first, for she realized that Rurin was not at all in the mood for any kind of conversation without too much anger. She looked guiltily at the brunette and asked her sister in a shaky voice what she had done to make the girl so angry with her. Selly was worried that she had caused them so much trouble, but it wasn't her fault. Rurin interrupted her and said that no one had come for her, trying not to turn around and look at the girl. And this fact means that the girl's parents are not in the town of Greek. That completely knocked out the girl. Her eyes opened wide with shock. She lost the last hope that she would be able to find her home and the people who should be the most important in her life. Immediately the girl began to shake like an autumn leaf, began to run her hands over each other, a sign of nervousness. It seemed she was about to cry. She knew it would happen, but tuned herself to the best scenario of her life. The thought that no one was looking for her began to devour her. But suddenly Rurin, with a very sudden change of tone to a very happy one, said that this was why Selly would now live on the first floor and start learning how to serve food. She played a very believable performance. The girl at first didn't even realize what had happened and whether she was hearing it live and it wasn't an act of her mind. What Rurin saw was that this girl looked a lot like herself. She doesn't even know how to cook. But suddenly Selly remembered that Rurin had told her that you can't go down to the first floor when there are guests there. And the dragon corrected that rule by saying that it was back when they didn't know yet that the little girl would be staying with them. And now she would be living with them, so why shouldn't she learn how to work in the kitchen? Selly was just thrilled, but for now the shock kept her from being completely happy with the news. And Rurin finally understood what the girl was trying to express when she tried cooking. The girl hugged her and told her that she could stay with them forever if only she wanted to. The brunette didn't say it out loud but made a promise to herself that this little girl would never feel loneliness and rejection. She would be cared for like a native child, guarding her from a bad fate. From now and forever they would be like one family. These words touched Selly. She began to cry at the same moment. Tears filled her eyes until they had no room left and they burst out. Now she had even more confidence in her good future than that hope. And the girl, of course, agreed to it. She had wanted to find a family again for so long, and now she realized that family is not necessarily mom and dad, relatives, biological. That's how she found something more intimate. And now with a kind tone, even more cheerful, she returned to the subject of Selly's being in the kitchen. That is, she had come there deliberately and on purpose. They began to laugh and joke about it. Now it was possible not to play some secret of anger. It turns out that Allison did not leave the girls unattended. He was sitting high on the magic circle to control everything that happens. Although he did not interfere, he now realized that in vain worried that something bad would happen. Already tomorrow Selly would have to meet the ranch workers, and the girl also hoped that her little sister would still teach her how to cook. And Rurin replied that if she wanted it so badly, it was better that she still turned to Ella. But suddenly the girl froze like a spellbound girl and stared ahead with bulging eyes. Something inside her made her sink inside herself, and there was a strange feeling in her chest that was hard to fight. She saw a lantern on the wall, some iron bars nearby, and her own shadow, which settled on the floor, following her every movement. The girl's eyes trembled, and it was very hard to get out of this state. She was so disgusted inside. Everything clenched. It seemed that she began to vomit, and her head hurt a lot. It wasn't long before Rurin noticed it too. It started to bother her, and her voice helped the girl back to reality when the brunette asked what was wrong with her. She froze like a statue. And now Selly realized what was wrong with her too. It was all because of memories. It turns out she remembered this road they were standing in front of now. What was left to deal with those memories was what she had done back then and what it had led to. She seemed terribly eager to find someone, and suddenly Rurin realized that it would be good to get a hold of those memories. So she began to nudge the girl's mind, going over her options. Maybe they had arranged to meet someone here. Any clue was important now. But suddenly Selly was terrified. She was in a cold sweat and started yelling at Rurin not to go there. No way. She had such a scared face that it made her wonder even more what was wrong. As Allison was cleaning up the kitchen with magic, Rurin was the one who told him what had happened. That bits and pieces of memories had come back to Selly, which surprised the archmage just as much. The dragon explained that she suddenly remembered something when they were walking in the forest, and it was quite eerie. Hearing this and seeing how quickly Rurin had come running, he became worried about Selly. That's why he wondered what was wrong with her. How was the girl? Rurin calmed down, saying that she was resting on the second floor. Her memories suddenly came back, so she's probably having a very hard time. She was clearly scared. And then the dragon with a commanding voice ordered Ella to keep an eye on her. If Selly was okay, then they could carry her to the lair. She herself was heading to check out that road, even though the girl had asked her not to go there. But Allison didn't stop that perky girl. He knew Rurin would still do as he saw fit. The moon was brightly but softly illuminating everything around them, especially beautifully covering the white flower on the windowsill, from which the wind was carelessly plucking petals and sending them into free flight, straight to the stars. And suddenly Selly remembered everything. It was so unusual. It made her breath spiral. Now she could make sense of her past, no matter how hard it was. The same moon lit up the path in Rurin. She walked, looking around, sometimes raising her eyes to the sky where the stars mingled with the snow that was falling from the clouds. And inside she couldn't still believe that Selly had family. The girl walked up and down the path from side to side and shouted into the void for whoever she was looking for to come out immediately. Even though it looked silly from the outside, she had no other choice to see anyone at night. And when she got very far, she realized now that it was too unreasonable. Selly had told her not to go there, no matter how much curiosity and desire to help pulled her there, and it was getting creepy. Suddenly she heard a sound from behind her back. She turned around to see what it was and saw the silhouette of a horse-drawn wagon coming closer and closer to her, wondering what it was doing here in the middle of the night. As the strangers got closer, she could get a closer look at the people who were driving the animals that were pulling it and the cage with the people in it, but no one was paying attention to her, much less stopping. Rurin immediately realized that it was a wagon with prisoners. It wasn't even people, but she didn't pay attention to it, thinking that it wasn't exactly what she was looking for, so she didn't bother, though it wasn't a pleasant sight. So she hurried to leave, thinking that there was nothing to do here and it was worth going back to the restaurant. She did not pay attention to the two prisoners, who were muttering something to themselves under their noses, and, in fact, why did it? But suddenly her hearing sharpened on a very familiar song. She plucked the words sunshine from the lyrics, and immediately froze, eyes wide open in surprise, first questioning how they knew this song, then about whether it is such an incredible coincidence, and then the final, what if this is what she was thinking about and what to do with it now? Just then the horses stopped abruptly and gave a loud neigh. This surprised the wagon drivers and they looked back to see what the problem was. They were already delayed by the guards at the entrance to the city. The wheels weren't moving, and not because they were stuck. The tracks on the ground had already formed after the horses tried to pull the wagon, which stopped and wouldn't go any further. So the problem wasn't the road but something else. And just then they saw some stranger clinging to the cage and asking them to stand, for she had questions for those who sat there, as if not knowing that it would be frowned upon by the coachman. Meanwhile Selly was rummaging through her memories and came to a mimicking conclusion, for she didn't remember it until now. It wasn't her parents, and began muttering to herself that she must find Melby and Melly. They were her sisters, and right now they were sitting in a cage, sobbing and staring in horror at whoever had started pestering them with interrogation through the cage, not understanding who it was or why the sudden person had such power. And Rurin, in a fit of rage, turned her attention to the two, one hand clutching the cage so tightly that it simply broke under such pressure. She questioned clearly in a cold voice how they knew the song. She herself had learned it not long ago and it might be related to their new family member. And she pressed the utterly terrified people in the cage, telling them to answer her immediately, while the two strangers only cast glances at those who were transporting them. The bald man who was driving the horses was watching this girl intently. He couldn't believe it. He thought he was imagining it. Could she really do this with her bare hands? But the girl was not going to give up. She asked the prisoners who was behind them and then promised that these two were untouched. Whatever the answer was, she would keep her word and defend them. The crying men in the cage with iron collars decided to trust this stranger, hoping that her power with which she was able to destroy their cage would serve to protect them. Only they wanted to tell of this song as they were better interrupted. It was the second carrier. The girl with a smirk said that enough of this performance, began to threaten the slaves that if they opened their mouths one more time she would cut off their tongues. The two got down from their bench and made their way over to the one that had paused their work, laughing, saying that even shut-ins like this could be fun. The girl was a rank 5 poppy and her name was Melkirk. She asked the brunette who she was and then, glowing with energy around her, asked if she knew whose strip she had stopped in the first place. Rurin didn't want a conflict and explained that she wasn't going to interrupt them, then turned to the prisoners. If they couldn't speak then just let them nod as they answered the questions. I asked if these two knew Selly. The hooded men were surprised. They hadn't expected such a question, and their answer was yes, though their faces could not be seen, but one could make out tears streaming through their eyelashes, and from the glitter on the smart light, suggesting that this was not an easy person for them to deal with. It was this that prompted the brunette to ask if she and this girl were close. At the same moment one of the prisoners answered in a completely frightened, shaking voice that yes, they were indeed very close. This was enough for the dragon to take action. With one wave of her hand she broke the cage altogether. Everyone in it was shocked. They had not expected to get freedom in this way, and now it was clear that this girl was best not to be trifled with. Of course, she intended to release only 2 of the prisoners, and those who transported it all sat in shock, gaping mouths. Who would have thought that there would be a man who would dare to use such insolence? The blonde, who was a mage, was so surprised that at first she couldn't even say anything, only laugh nervously. They had already threatened her, but for this stranger it was no reason to go on her way. A red light began to come off of her. Immediately she turned to her partner, Nolan, bidding him farewell to disconnect the wagon. And then it turned out that this man was not a girl, as one would think at the beginning. It was Lord Merkirk, and the man was worried if he was going to do what he was thinking. And the guy replied that it was just like that. If this is the way things are going to work out, then we'll have to get rid of them all. Immediately out of nowhere, as if falling from the sky, fire particles started flying in the air. That person used rank 5 fire magic. He roared. A magic circle was ripped from his hands, and from the class B lightning. He was finally pissed off. At this point Rurin was helping those she needed to get out, and as soon as they looked back they saw the spheres flying at them. It looked terrifying, and it seemed almost impossible to avoid being hit by them. At that moment there was an explosion, the so-called amber blast. Hot air dispersed around them, and where it was dispersing from, the explosion was already doing its thing, spreading fire. The Lord was getting very angry. First they were stopped at the entrance. Now this strange girl is preventing them from doing their job. He kept twisting the name Selly around on his lips. To understand. So who is she? I suppose it could be the daughter of some duke. Suddenly a voice was heard from the fire. The mage turned and saw the silhouette of the girl who stopped the road. There was some blue particle near her, and she said that she gave him a chance. She wanted to deal with him in a good way. The same particle near her pierced the fire, leaving a hole in the shape of a circle. Rurin thought that she had become very kind lately, so she would not kill this man, but he would have to be more careful from now on. When the girl pointed her hand with her finger out at this guy, a sphere formed around his hand. He didn't realize what had started to happen, and then he felt an eerie pain. When he turned around, directs his gaze to his hand, then the video that his hand was no longer there, and from there a fountain of dark red blood killed him. His shock, in which he stood for a few seconds, passed, and now he felt the full range of pain. The guy fell to the floor, started on screaming, trying to overcome that pain. He could not believe that he had just deprived his hand. The prisoners that the girl had saved, shivering, looked back a few more times at those who had transported them, and the brunette decided that now it was necessary to help these yours. She knew who to take them to, though she wasn't sure if Elena was still awake. Ice formations with sharp tips appeared all around her. The two people she was picking up asked, not at all sure who the girl was. Rurin meanwhile summoned a portal, turned to them and replied with a smirk that she was Selly's older sister, as if she was proud of the title. After a very short period of time, she almost drank the doors down on the naked Elena in that one, shouting to the entire building that the elf had patients coming. Both Elena and Serena jumped off their sleeping places, freaking out. The red dragon even thought it was an ambush. The brunette left her new acquaintances there. She herself went to her lair, walking down the hallway and calling for Selly herself. I was very interested in how she was doing, if she was all right. When she entered the sleeping room, she saw Elle there, who was surprised that the girl had returned so quickly. And on the bed sat a little girl, who was very happy that she could see her little sister again. Elle explained that it was getting late, so he had moved the girl upstairs. Rurin wasn't worried about that. She was only worried that Selly was already feeling much better, and yes replied that she was indeed fine. And right away, bragging, she rubbed her nose, saying that she had good news, and she was completely proud of herself, of what she had done. She didn't speak directly, only saying that she thought she had found those who knew the girl's favorite song, who was sitting on the bed, and she and Allison nearby were surprised at such a statement, completely not expecting to hear it, especially at such a late hour. The brunette wanted to stretch the time, giving this moment more intrigue, and wanted to say, stretching the moment, the names of those she had found, but the little girl overpowered her, immediately asking if these people were Melby and Melly. Immediately Rurin herself was shocked, asking in surprise if Selly had remembered something, but she had not yet had time to get an answer when she saw what a very joyful child was carrying to her. Selly very firmly understood the completely dumbfounded Rurin, called her sis, and told her thank you for what she would do for her. She said that they were actually her relatives. The brunette was glad to hear that they were able to find the ones this girl cared about, and put her hand on her head, responding to the hug. Ella on the other hand was more interested in where his friends had managed to find them in the first place. To which he got the instant answer that they had been in the strip with the prisoners. Melby had been injured, so she had taken them to Helena. And then, so that Selly wouldn't worry, she added that her life wasn't in any danger. She wasn't in danger, speaking of the girl, so there was certainly no need to worry. And the little girl replied that the main thing was that they were fine. After such a busy day, she suggested that they go to bed and see them tomorrow, laughing and saying that her sister was the best since she could handle this difficult case. They had brushed their teeth and were already in bed. Allison and Rurin had passed out almost instantly, because they had expended so much energy during the day that it was hard to count. Only Selly was lying in the middle between them, awake, looking up with a smile on her face, thinking about something of her own. She thanked God for everything being resolved. It was just an incredible relief that Melby and Melly were alive. They had found, and everything was going to be okay now. She took the hands of the two people who lay beside her and began to pull them towards her, thinking about how grateful she was that her little sister and brother were the first people she had met here. They had turned out to be good people who had given support and a place to live. He remembered those moments when Rurin had decided to go where it was warm and there was plenty of food and offered the girl to either come with her or stay here, and the girl had replied that she was already running. It was during their first meeting and how well that had turned out. There was also a clear moment in his memory how they had promised her that she would definitely be found, gently stroking her head, and they really hadn't lied, had done everything for that. And she also couldn't forget the time she'd eaten the delicious pancakes Elsa had made, how she'd admired and savored the taste, shared them with others, and acknowledged that it was her favorite meal now. In their arms she cried, of course, from happiness. The girl was surrounded by love, as if they were real parents. She could not worry about anything and was not afraid. She remembered the happy moments, how they walked in the fallen snow, how they spent time together. These were the happiest moments of her life. Now she definitely realized it, and now she was falling asleep in their arms. Tears were pouring from her eyes to her cheeks, but at the same time she was laughing, because she was overflowing with joy. She had found a real family that she wanted to stay in forever. Soon it was morning in the city, frosty and cold, but the snow had not yet completely covered the ground. There was only a light hoarfrost. It was time to wake up. Allison opened his eyes, looking at his girls lying next to him. It was hard to open his eyes fully. He wanted to stay in the warm bed longer, but suddenly he found that Selly was there and gone. Immediately he got up, being very surprised at where the baby could have gone if she was lying right next to them. He woke up Rurin to wake her up. He wanted to give her some very disturbing news. She got up. She wasn't used to getting up early and was disoriented at first. Soon she noticed that the girl had disappeared somewhere. She had a lot of questions in her head. Elle said that he hadn't heard anything. The girl confirmed that she hadn't noticed anything either, although they didn't understand how they couldn't feel that the child had gone up and gone somewhere. The only assumption that would help to be logical was that Selly had gone to Helena's because she wanted to see her relatives very badly, but that was a bit absurd because she didn't know where to go. They didn't think long, sat down on the bed, and began to get ready, pulling on their clothes, changing her pajamas, and suddenly Rurin said that she had heard something yesterday after all, and it was rather strange, but she wouldn't say right away what it was because I wasn't sure of it myself. She was very anxious. Even her eyebrows frowned, coming closer together. They didn't have much time. If this option turned out to be wrong, they would have to think of something. Right now they decided that they needed to run to the clinic as soon as possible and were there very soon. The guys didn't knock. They didn't ask. They opened the door very sharply, running inside, shouting, asking if Selly was here now. Their haste and some disrespectfulness was understandable, though it looked quite wild. Elena reacted calmly, greeting Lady Rurin and Mr. Ella, but Serena was indignant, asking her to be careful with the door, because it might break. The elf didn't know what they were here for yet, so she simply said that they were just in time. She had just finished treating the ones Rurin had brought in the night. They needed to rest, but the worst was over. The two who had been here all night were also very happy to see their saviors. Allison saw them for the first time. He looked them over from head to toe, examining every bit of them with his eyes. And the boy asked Rurin what was the matter. These people didn't look like the ones he wanted to see, but even more he didn't believe that they were relatives of the girl they had taken in. And then he remembered the way Selly had cheered, hugging the brunette, thanking her little sister. It was enough for her to hear just their names to immediately tell that they were definitely her relatives. Melby and Melly were ready to cry with joy. They didn't know what to say. They only remembered that yesterday everything had happened in such a confused way that they didn't understand anything. But they were still thankful for their rescue. They were as happy as they could be and wanted to see their sister as soon as possible. So they asked why Selly wasn't with them. Elle was embarrassed. He was wiping behind his ear, and Rurin was quite downcast when she realized that the girl wasn't here either. She turned around and went somewhere else. The brunette only asked the archmage to keep an eye on them for a while, opened the door and without explaining anything left, not even answering the guy's question where she was going. Just then she came to the butcher store. Behind the counter stood Reina, who didn't know yet that something had happened, and only greeted the visitors with her husband in the store. As soon as she noticed how panicked Rurin was and how anxiously and hastily she didn't ask if Selly was here, she realized that something was wrong. Her answer was negative, there was no one here, and then completely said, as cut off, that she had never seen her. I doubt her knowledge. I asked her again if she was in the restaurant at Ella's. Rurin was taken aback. I don't understand what is going on. What is this woman saying? She became so worried that a few sweats came off her. She asked what it meant that the woman had not seen her. After all, a couple days ago she had asked for help finding the girl's parents. They had even stopped by her butcher shop. Reina stepped back in surprise, saying that this had not happened. And suddenly the butcher's wife said that there were only Rurin and Allison, which SLVSEM knocked her out of her rut. Girl. It seemed that the whole world went crazy, and it just cannot be. Meanwhile, at Alina's house, everyone was sitting around the table, discussing the fact that Selly had called Melby and Melly her younger cousins, which made them laugh. The boy also explained that it was okay to refer to Melly that way. He doesn't enter. They say that Selly doesn't memorize age, so just out of habit she calls him little brother too. But in fact they were the same age. Allison was disturbed by this. He put his hand to his chin, thinking it over. Even if they were the same age, it was kind of weird, because the girl they saw was very young, and then apologized for the awkward question, and asked how old they were. Melly explained that she was turning 17, but she didn't understand what the question was about, and her brother said that he was going to be 18, without even realizing that it would lead to a clue in the future. Allison was in a state of confusion that he never seemed to be in, and he remembered that Selly was somewhere around 13 or 14. He didn't know what was going on at all, and the girl even knew about the age confusion. It couldn't be a stupid mistake. The guy was sure of it. Elena here better ask the archmage if he was all right. Serena was also alarmed by the sudden change in his mood. What on earth was going on here? Allison was horrified. He couldn't get it all into his head. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. But the guy's mind was completely different. He just couldn't understand how the difference between these two prisoners and Selly could be as much as 5 years apart if she and the guy sitting across from him were the same age. Allison couldn't believe that Elena had never seen Selly before, even though she'd tried so hard to find her in her memory, but it hadn't worked, and Serena had added that she hadn't seen her either. He was trying to find some clues, so he hoped they'd at least heard a voice, because Rurin was always up the stairs, muttering to herself. Serena said she'd only heard Rurin, and thought she was just mad at someone. Elle was horrified. Even Reina hadn't seen her. No one had seen her but him and Rurin, and the girl had gone missing, so it was almost impossible to find her. He thought he'd been wrong, but when Selly had first come to the lair, Rurin had told him about the flower, and they'd met. Elgin was surprised at the plant and asked what it was, but the girl didn't answer at once, only asked her opinion if she thought it was as beautiful as it was for her. She had never admired any plants so much, and only then explained that it was a gibran flower and Rurin would be growing it on the second floor of the restaurant. It was her sudden decision. Who would have thought that she would take up such a difficult task as growing a plant? Suddenly Ellison stood up, realizing something, his face expressing confusion and nervousness. It was as if he had been doused with cold water, making him cheer up. Without explaining anything, Elle opened a portal and saying he had something to check entered the dark hole of the summoned portal. Now he shouldn't waste a minute, because if it turned out to be true it would change a lot of things. Serena asked Ella if they should go too, and Elena didn't ask at all. She just stood up and said that she would definitely go with the archmage. The boy was in the restaurant in no time, thinking about the strange gibran flower that Rurin had brought to the restaurant. He was serious and determined as he walked out of the portal, the thought swirling in his head that, come to think of it, Selly had come to the lair with them, but he only sensed her presence when he saw the flower. When he entered the room, he saw only Rurin in the empty and graying room. Her back was turned and she was very upset, but it wasn't clear at first why. and when she turned around he realized why she was in such a bad mood. In her hands was a potted flower, only it was all shabby and about to wilt completely. It struck Ella. Rurin began to think that it was because of her, though she didn't understand why it didn't survive. After all, she had watered the flower on time, cared for it, and it didn't survive. Something strange was happening. Everything was back to normal and not in a good way at all. It was quite eerie that the plate that Selly had broken was intact and in its place. Even the carelessly fluffed pillow was still there, as if no one had slept on it, and the girl was gone, as if Ella and Ruran had shared a hallucination of a little girl. While someone was thinking about how a person could use teleportation magic, everyone who was at Alina's house also came to the restaurant by portal. They didn't understand what was wrong, but the owners of this place did. Rurin also began to guess. She fell the mood completely and soon she felt very creepy about what she had come up with. It was as if Selly had never been here. But how could that be possible? There was no idea in her head. But suddenly Helena's face changed. As soon as she saw what was in Lady Rurin's hands, she began to stammer. Puzzles began to form in her head too. She asked if the flower was Gibran in the girl's hands, and then the couple fell into a stupor. For them it was like a thunderstorm in the clear sky. After a second pause, which for them lasted longer, Allison asked the elf if she knew something about him. Serena was very amazed at such irresponsibility that Rurin brought the flower without even knowing what it was. She had also heard about this plant, though it was very rare, and Elena somehow got embarrassed and lowered her eyes to the floor. And then she decided to tell that it is also called La Plataya, and everyone began to listen to her attentively, because it seems that the whole secret of this situation is in it. The whole point is that it is an eternal flower of the underworld, and legends say that it is associated with the ascension of the soul, wish fulfillment, reincarnation. It is simply incredible. Even in the magical world did not believe that such a truth exists. And according to the records, it will wither away when it delivers the voice of the dead to the living. The boys were even more shocked. Now the guess was closer than ever, but they still didn't believe what was happening, that it was really possible. That's why they tried to disbelieve to the last. Allison was so creeped out that he couldn't open his mouth, but when he finally did, he asked what Elena was trying to say, even though he was afraid to hear what he himself realized. It turns out that no one has seen Selly, and the flower brings the voice of the dead. The girls were silent and waited for El to understand everything himself, so that they do not have to say it out loud. Just then her two in shabby clothes awkwardly intruded into the conversation, asking if something had happened to Selly, wondering where she was, as if they hadn't heard what had just been discussed. Rurin at the same moment in a stern and commanding voice informed the two that they were not just prisoners, and the guy and the girl who knew Selly personally could not understand what was required of them, because they had not gotten the answer yet. The girl spoke of needing their help in finding Selly, the first thing she was interested in, and it seemed very important. The dragon asked to be told who had separated them all, and remembering their not the easiest fate they touched on their scars and wounds, and with a hesitation replied that they were really just glad and met Selly in the cell. Then they listened to the song. Its lyrics, close my eyes and I fall asleep. The place they were in was rather strange for such an activity and such a beautiful song, but to cheer oneself up in such a bleak situation is somehow necessary. The two of them were just children then, with iron collars around their necks on chains like dogs, and the girl was clapping her hands and marveling at how well the other girl sang, and the boy remarked that she was a real singer. And in front of them stood Selly. The strange thing was that she was the same age as she appeared to Elu and Rurin. She said she didn't know what it meant, but when they got out she would sing that song always. Even though she had the same collar around her neck, the girl never lost her cheerfulness. At that moment Melly decided that she could play the tune, and then Selly said that was just fine, and then turned to Melby. Since the lead parts were taken, he would dance. The boy was surprised that he got that particular part. But quite unexpectedly, in such a good moment with fantasies, Melby wondered if they could get out. He was a realist and realized that most likely they would just be sold. But Selly didn't lose hope and shared it with the others, saying that they would definitely get out. The spark of a dream was burning in her eyes. She was so alive. Her spirit was not broken by the situation she found herself in. And then she took to giving a motivational speech, assuring them that no one was going to buy the children. They wouldn't be needed for a few more years. And while that was the case, she offered to train. She thought they could break the shackles when they were older. The other children took this confidence from their new little sister, agreeing that they should really get stronger. But suddenly, a not poor uncle came into the dungeon, dressed in rich clothes, with jewelry and a mask over his eyes, laughing loudly and admiring how wonderful the children were. But there was irony and sarcasm in his voice, as if he was putting the wrong meaning into his words. He saw the brother and sister and immediately decided that he would take them both. Melly and Melby were in shock. Tears started to flow from their eyes, no matter how bad it was for them. But to fall into the hands of a strange and suspicious man was even more frightening. The other people who had come to choose their slaves did not even interfere or bargain. Since this man was interested in them, they knew they should not stand in his way. They just gave up, and the poor children were shaking with fear and worry. They huddled together. They had heard about this man, and they realized that if they were sold to him, they were out of luck. They could only wonder what was next for them, but they didn't even try to hope for something better. And Selly had her back turned and was in no mood at all. She had distanced herself from her friends because she couldn't accept the fact that they would have to part. It was probably not as hard for her as it was for those two, but she was still worried about their fate. Suddenly a voice was heard from one of the cameras, criticizing and provoking the old man, challenging him with words. Can't he even look him in the eye? Then the man stopped and froze in place. He couldn't believe that someone dared to raise a voice in his direction with such disrespect. Without turning around, he asked who it was that was yelling. His voice alone could drastically change the atmosphere. The other nobles also became nervous, afraid of this man's anger. They looked towards the camera from where it was someone had said it. It was Selly. She continued her speech with a completely non-evil face about how she must have heard it too, and then asked if he thought everyone would indulge him. And Melly and Melby were now more worried about her little sister, not understanding why she was doing this. And then she finally blew his patience, saying that, well, yeah, sure, perverts like him don't care at all. And then the man turned to face him, chuckling nervously, his laughter getting stronger with each second. He angrily made the decision that he liked this girl better. And immediately he ordered the guy who was standing in the corner and writing everything down to change the order for her. And he didn't dare to interfere. He quickly rewrote everything and replied that he would do whatever the customers wanted, because they were always right. Only Melby wanted to shout that there was no need to change anything. They would go. It was better to let them take them away. He wanted to save the girl, but she gagged him with her foot and put her finger to her lips to keep quiet and not to beep. She was pulled up by a chain to the iron bars, and she looked back at the children and explained to them that a real sister would protect her own, no matter what, and then asked them if they remembered the song she was humming to them. And as soon as she was taken away from the cell, she promised that one day they would meet again, and her brother and sister shouted after her. They did not want such a fate for Selly. They asked her not to leave, but nothing could be changed. The one who had become like a sister to them, they saw for the last time. She was led down the cold corridor to her new master. It was an incredibly difficult and terrible moment, which they could not erase from their memories. It was 5 years ago, but the memory still brought tears to their eyes. They felt they had to find her. It was their duty, considering what she had done for them. Rurin was in a bad way. She couldn't get over what she had learned. Elle went over to her and tried to bring her back to her normal state, to get her out of her thoughts. This was not the time to get discouraged. But what was more strange was that there was a magical aura around the flower, and this immediately distracted Rurin from all the bad memories and thoughts. The plant did indeed begin to glow softly with a blue light. As it turned out, Rurin was most upset that she too had made a promise to Seely and nothing made her sadder than the fact that she wouldn't be able to fulfill her word. She asked the others if they would join them to go all together. Melly and Melby immediately said without a second thought that they would join them. It was for them. After all, it was almost their own sister who had saved them one day. The sun was beginning to set over the horizon. Evening was already in full swing, ready to hand over power over the land into the hands of the night. And the boys were trying to scour the whole area as quickly as possible until it was completely dark. They were running in a hurry, following where the flower showed them. Rurin was asking where to go next, and Elle, who was holding the flower, said he was leading them that way, and led them there. And the boy and girl who were keeping them company kept calling out for their sister, in case she called back. Rurin began to conjure something, at the same time resenting the fact that Selly had gone somewhere without saying anything. It was very irresponsible. She made everyone nervous, but there was no point in being angry with her now. It wouldn't help them find her any faster. And then she remembered Helena's words that the flower would wither when it carried the voice of the dead to the living. They had been so shocked then that they hadn't understood anything, and now they were completely unaware of what it meant. And then she threw the orb she had conjured, and a large portal appeared in the spot in front of him, which formed a black hole within the glow, into which she had to go and pass, trusting the dragon that she had correctly set him a point to move through. She set her goal that she must at all costs find Selly, who appeared before her eyes, standing back and humming the same song of the lone green leaf and the spring wind. From exhaustion, Rurin fell to the floor in utter helplessness and tried to catch her breath. Her hands were burning. Allison immediately ran up to her and said that she had created too much teleportation. It was better for him to deal with it himself. Meanwhile, Melly and Melby did not stop shouting all around them, looking for Selly, though it had no result. They did not give up hope that she would be found, would hear a native voice and show herself before their eyes. It was impossible to accept it. Selly was always the one who looked for a way to solve the problem, and did not give in to it. Even when they were tormented by the voice, she found a way out, namely, that you can eat in grass. It is no less tasty, thereby showing brother and sister a new way not to die because of hunger. She cheered him in the saddest moments, like when Melby tried to put all his strength into his hands, bending iron bars. Though he failed, the girl did not depress his fighting spirit, only confirming that it was really cool. When it got dark, they reached the place where they could see a high tower. Allison informed them that the mana leads there, but they still had to get to it. But it was not the right time to retreat. They had come all this way. It was not allowed to lose hope and strength so abruptly. Melly and Melby were already exhausted. Everything was not clear to them, but they had to go on. They decided to help these two, and the purpose for which they were there played an incredibly important role. The archmage had opened the portal to make it easier for them to reach the tower and not to waste everyone's strength, but only his own, which he had much more than Rurin. Without thinking of the danger, they rushed in, almost kicking the door open. They immediately fell in and started calling for Selly. The girl had to be here. The flower had brought them here. They were ready to throw themselves into their little sister's arms. But what they saw was not at all joyful. Their faces changed, especially Melly's and Melby's. There was horror in their eyes, and inside, the whole world that had been built on hope all the last time crumbled. The very song Selly had taught them began to play in their heads. The very song she had taught them, the one they were to sing together in freedom, like a real musical group. The warm sunshine, the spring wind, the lonely green leaf. But soon the words grew quieter and the girl's voice faded away. And all because they saw a simply horrible picture. There was Selly lying before them, only she was no longer alive at all, tortured on a chain. Melly and Melby, stumbling, still rushed toward their little sister, screaming as if they hoped that as soon as they got closer it would be just a hallucination and everything would turn out for the best. But running closer, nothing changed, causing the tears in their eyes to ask for it themselves, directly being out of their eyes. They were so bitter and sad that they seemed like they could cut their cheeks. Rurin and Allison had no face either. They hadn't expected to see what they had just seen. Unfortunately, it was an unbelievable shock, though they had suspected it from the beginning, after Alina's words. But still the hope remained with them all this way that the girl could be saved. Melly and Melby fell down near the corpse of Selly, who had already turned into a skeleton, but her clothes were still the same, and unfortunately, but it was a bitter truth, she was still wearing a collar with iron and a huge chain. Brother and sister could not accept that they had lost the girl, who had been with them in the dungeon for so long and had given them at least a moment of joy in life. They had lost a dear person. But this dramatic scene was interrupted by the sudden appearance of two people. They were the same man and lord who were carrying the prisoners, and from whom Rurin had managed to rescue her brother and sister, who were now mourning the body of their dead friend. These two hoped that there were still some bandages left and remembered that they could be inside this tower. They were very much concerned that all the slaves had run away, so the only way out was to light the beacon and warn the count. But they looked into the darkness of the room into which the door opened and were horrified to see people who should not be there. Two of the company stood over the skeleton of the dead girl, and two more looked back at them, their eyes filled with horror and hatred of those who had done it. It was frightening to see such a sight, and goosebumps ran through their bodies. But even more alarming was the fact that up to that moment they had been quite sure that no one could be here. And here were four unwanted persons. These two froze with surprise and certainly recognized the brunette, who not so long ago had contributed to the fact that all the slaves ran away. Breaking into the cage in which they were transported, they did not even know what to do and how to behave. Their unwanted guests were twice twice as many, and there was no time to run away or come up with a good excuse. And then they saw that those two people who were standing over the body of the deceased were the slaves freed by the incredibly strong girl. The brother and sister turned to face them and recognized their tormentors. After the loss of a very dear person to them and long wandering as slaves and prisoners, sadness, anger, resentment and rage mixed in their souls, and now they will not wait humbly for their fate to be decided by these people. They are ready to fight with them right now. The hooded girl's breathing quickened as she recognized the one who had made her lose one hand on her arm, and the cold sweat was coming off her forehead and running down her face in streams. This was the perfect moment for her to take revenge on the one who had treated her, but fear was still inside her chest. What if something worse happened to her than before? Rurin recognized these people too and now realized that they were locked in a stalemate with those who already hated her. She recognized what she must have miscalculated by not killing them but just crippling them. This dilemma had to be solved somehow because they were all unsafe now. Though with her power and Ella's power everything should have been under their control. And the reason for that was her desire not to rid the world of a couple more people, no matter how bad they were. Then she, even though the two wanted to kill her, said she would give them a chance. But the hooded girl couldn't hear anything anymore. Shaking, she brought her hand up. Her voice came out of her lips with the same ragged sound. A red energy began to form over her fingers, which only increased. The man and the girl rushed at the brunette, bare sword, and the one who had magic was able to turn that orb into a magic circle. With a cry of wish that the one who had harmed them would die, they were already over the dragon in the girl's body, vengeance raging in their blood and a desire to hurt the one who had robbed them of a further chance at a full life, and passively brought the count's anger upon his subjects. For them this stranger was a real monster, because she was not a mage and looked like an ordinary person, and because of this there was a question how she managed to deal with them so easily. But then the attack was interrupted by a sudden event. The magic circle created by the girl was completely broken, and from its center all the power was directed forward. Someone sucked it out. It was Allison. He was very angry that the one he loved and who was so close to him in every fight, in the bad moments of life and in the good, tried to kill. Waving his hand, he absorbed all the energy from the magic circle of the sudden rival into himself to disarm the bastards. The guy immediately realized what was going on and who they really were. Rurin didn't stand aside, expecting Allison to deal with them himself. The girl immediately realized and summoned a sphere of her energy, which gradually, with blue light, absorbed the entire dark room. The sphere gradually increased, which couldn't help but notice the man and woman, who suddenly arrived in a place they already knew, but they didn't have time to do anything. After a moment, the bright light completely hid the two prisoner and slave carriers. They began to scream, but this loud sound was interrupted by another, which made their ears ring. It was caused by the power of the dragon, which wanted to quickly deal with those with whom it had not settled accounts until now. The sphere turned into such a huge beam that it burst from the tower wall, making a hollow like a mark in the ground, and headed deep into the forest where the heroes had come to rescue Selly from. Everything around them began to shake or vibrate from such power. It was strange that the tower was still standing and not falling to the ground, collapsing into piles of separate bricks as if they had never been one unified structure. Rurin, standing in the rubble of what used to be a room, surrounded by her own blue fire, and knowing the whole story of Selly and her estranged brother and sister, thought that, if she thought hard enough, the chance for life she'd given them had been gone 5 years ago, when the countdown to the terrible events in the lives of innocent children had begun. And then she and Elle ran up to the rest of the boys, who all couldn't get away from Selly's bones. The enemies had already been defeated and the melancholy moment enveloped them again and made them sad for the loss of such a beautiful friend and child. A real ray of sunshine. Melly was completely shattered. She thought that it wasn't supposed to end this way. Through a sea of tears, she mumbled that this wasn't how she wanted it to be. Now her world had turned gray. She and her brother lived in hope of reuniting with her baby sister. She didn't manage to meet her little sister. She caught only her remains. It was just awful to look at her white bones, realizing that it used to be a person, especially such a dear and important person, who was the meaning of her life for a very long time. Rurin asked the corpse why she was sitting there, as if she couldn't see that the girl was no longer among the living and could neither hear nor answer. With a single movement of her hand, Rurin was able to break the chains that were chained to the collar that was fastened around Selly's neck. It wasn't hard, for they were obviously old, and it was only a matter of time before they broke into pieces. While everyone was mourning the dead girl, The dragon said that now nothing more would be bestowed on her throat. The atmosphere was completely subdued. It cut off the possibility of breathing. Everyone was having a hard time getting through this moment. Suddenly the flower in the sphere that had brought them here began to glow brightly. Magical circles spread out from it, and particles blurred in the air. Allison looked at it. He was amazed at what was beginning to happen, and didn't fully understand what it would lead to. Suddenly the energy from the flower and its petals split into 3 beams. They went straight to the skeleton with Ellie, where they gathered into a single sphere, and at the same moment began to penetrate her bones. No one expected something like this to happen, but everyone expected it to be for the benefit of the deceased. After that, Rurin and Elle were stunned. They were faced with a person they had never expected to meet, and then they heard a child's high-pitched voice of a girl. She was very happy to find everyone who was standing in this place. The brunette couldn't pronounce her name completely. She was surprised. It seemed to her that it was all a hallucination. It was Selly. The girl was as cheerful as ever. She was squealing with joy, and could not be happy that they really came for her. She was waiting for it so much that she was already tired, but she did not lose hope. Selly had a lot of it. She often shared it with everyone, and it was she who moved these people to a common goal, to find the missing girl. Melly and Melby could not believe what they saw. The girl's name came out of their mouths. They immediately burst from their seats, and their tears of bitterness were replaced by tears of joy. It was the most heartbreaking moment of their lives. Even the girl's departure from their cell did not cause such violent emotions. Their belief that everything would work out came true. Sobbing with happiness, they rushed to hug their little sister, and she laughed as if she didn't understand what these people had to go through to come this way and find her. And with the same childish look at the world, she was surprised that these two were now higher than her. Of course, so much time had passed. Her brother and sister had grown up, and she had remained here all this time as a dead child. But then the boy was stunned. The tears from his eyes did not stop flowing, but he was again lowered in horror, not understanding what was happening to his sister. After all, she was not in her former body, but translucent, as if before them stood not a girl, but her spirit. But he did not understand why then they could touch her. Selly rushed to announce the bad news, but with the same calmness in her voice that she always spoke with. She began to dissolve into thin air, and apologized to everyone here. It seems that the time given by the flower was almost up. Now they realized that to resurrect her completely, it was impossible, and would have to settle for just a fleeting encounter with her and the opportunity to touch the important person in her life. She turned to Melby, telling him that he was trying very hard, while the boy had tears running down his chin and had to bite his lips to keep from sobbing. They wanted to talk to his sister longer, asking how she thought she had gotten out of here. Melly reflected everything. She was not ready to say goodbye to the girl. After a minute of meeting after so much time apart, the girl told about what she wanted to have time with her sister, and said that she even looked for instruments, and memorized all the songs she knew, and that they had time to compose. They clung to Selly's spirit, squeezing her hands very tightly, crying, begging her not to leave. Their hearts were torn to pieces, for they had done so much, and now they would have to be separated again. But their little sister did not change her face. Her smile was to show that there was nothing wrong with it, and that this was the way fate had ordered her life. They were very upset at the thought that they couldn't even thank their sister for saving them, but the girl just hummed, smiling and closing her eyelids, and then asked them if they had already forgotten what she had told them the day they parted in the dungeon. Even if they had, Selly reminded them that it was a big sister's duty to protect her younger siblings. The boy who was kneeling in front of her and now couldn't look up reminded her that they were the same age, so she had done it for the same age. What bothered him the most was that she had been so brave to protect two siblings who were not her own, and they couldn't do anything to keep the girl alive. And now the girl's phantom headed towards Allison and Rurin. She addressed them as sister and brother as well. The boy and girl stood waiting to see what Selly would say to them last, and judging by her facial expression she wouldn't make them disappointed or sad. But this very moment brought tears to their eyes. She said with an incredibly contented face, as if she was about to laugh, that even though she hadn't lived such a long life anyway, she felt that the time she had spent here had been the best of her life. It still seemed that she was glowing not from the magic of the flower, but from her childish naivety, and honest quality, and joy within her heart, even at such a difficult moment. And before saying goodbye, she asked the owner of the restaurant to make her more pancakes. If they had a chance to meet again in this life, the dragon and the archmage stood in front of her with a completely concerned face. They did not know how to react to this, and were about to cry at the tragic fate of the girl, and the fact that the one they had cared for so long penetrated to her as a real daughter. All this time was just a spirit, and her body was hidden from everyone in the tower. But they did not intend to show their sadness, so they just hugged Selly warmly, saying if she was still asking for it, they would have done it anyway. They surrounded her with love and care at that moment, like real parents, and tried to put into their heads the idea that it was not worth getting upset. They said goodbye with dignity, and the hope in their hearts that they could see each other again was renewed. The flower was already surrounded by green light. Its petals had almost completely fallen off and the stem was already disintegrating, which meant that the time to talk to the dead was running out. The girl realized this too, but she was still happy to be able to spend this moment with the nearest and dearest people she had found. Selly pressed herself harder against Allison, not at all, as tears began to run from his eyes. He did not cry often, but this moment touched him to the core. The girl, with a voice full of hope and joy, asked if Rurin and Elle promised that everything would be exactly as they had just discussed. She almost completely disappeared into thin air. It was the last moment when everyone could talk to her, and when the next time would be, no one knew. The boy replied that they promised and they would not break their word. At that very moment, Selly was completely transformed into particles that scattered through the air. Her sisters and brothers, though they were just named, looked up as if in those specks of light. They wanted to see one last glimpse of the girl. Sadness was again on all the robes, leaving a trace of bitterness. None of those in the tower could hold back the tears, but Rurin stood there with no emotion at all, as if she had been sucked dry. Her heart had turned to stone, and every beat was very hard, beating its rhythm directly into her head. She thought that no one could understand what she had given up and what she had gone through. Deciding to stay with this girl, the dragon began to tremble, trying not to show the storm of emotions that raged inside her. She had already accepted the fact that there would be someone she could take care of and protect, and life had taken that person away from her. Her hand reached for the dead girl's skull. The last drop of a tear fell on his forehead, shattering on the white cold bone, as if this man had never come back to life. It was time to leave, and this place in everyone's memory will remain as something symbolic, a place where they could unite and soak in the life energy of this glorious little girl. Leaving behind a huge hole in the tower, the boys left, wanting to return home, but also remembering to take Selly with them to her new home, where she was still loved and expected. This night gave them both the beautiful and wonderful emotions of reuniting with someone who had become a member of the family, and the terrible, soul-crushing memories that would forever be imprinted in their minds, and would not let them forget about themselves. Rena heard the door to the store open. She looked towards the entrance and saw Allison there, and at first, not knowing what had happened, she asked if she needed to look for Selly's parents. Hopefully the boys had already found her family, but as soon as she saw the archmage's attitude, her face changed. Now she was filled with an unpleasant feeling of interest. What was wrong with him? The guy replied that no, not necessary, but seeing his mood, the woman asked why, hoping that they had already been found, but not dismissing the idea that something much more unpleasant could have happened. There was an awkward silence in the butcher store. Rena shifted her gaze downward. There was a shovel at the guy's feet. It was covered in dirt, and it wasn't long before Elle told her everything that had happened to them. Such a story gave her the creeps. She couldn't imagine how strong these people were to survive this moment. Now a part of the sadness that had followed the heroes from the tower itself had crept into this room. The woman braided summed up that her visitor had been through a lot, and was very sorry for what had happened, but she realized that it was impossible to influence anything. The morning in the restaurant began with unexpected news. After such a morally heavy night, everyone had hoped that the new acquaintances would stay a little longer or stay here at all, but they decided completely differently. Melby and Melly, having changed into clean and whole clothes, were going to leave the place. The owner of the restaurant, of course, was surprised, but the brother and sister were not going to change their opinion, and just thanked these kind people for everything they had done for them, and especially for the opportunity to see their little sister again, now forever a little sister. Their new acquaintances were very interested in where these two young people were going, and they did not keep a secret, but gave an instant answer that they wanted to go around the world and spread the song with Ellie. It was the only thing that connected them now, and they would like the whole world to know about it. And then they added modestly that it was their dream, and they would do anything to make it come true, all for the sake of the girl who had given them faith in freedom, and in a better future, and in addition had become a true soulmate to them. Rurin was still not in a good mood. This was too traumatic for her, and Allison asked Melly and Melby to wait at least another minute, because he had something for them. In a couple of minutes he came back and a rather large sack was already flying at his brother and sister. The owner of the restaurant asked them to take it with them. Or rather, he didn't even ask them to take it. He almost ordered them to take it. They barely had time to catch the sack. The guys didn't understand what it was. When they opened the sack, they saw a lot of silver coins. And Elle immediately explained that he had put some money there so that they wouldn't run into bandits, and advised them to hide it behind their backs so that they wouldn't lose it and especially so that they wouldn't steal it. He made sure that the two of them wouldn't starve during their seemingly slow journey. And while Melby and Melly argued in a panicked voice that they couldn't accept it, it was too broad a gesture for someone they'd only known for a couple days. Rurin interrupted them with a smirk to keep their outrage to a minimum, telling them that if they got hungry, they could come here anytime. They'd be fed deliciously and cheaply, if not for free. And they were sure to come back here again, because they were leaving their new acquaintances with Selly here forever. Her grave was not that far from the restaurant, and anytime you could come to visit her or talk about life, not seeing it as just a stone slab, but a place of marking where Selly's soul could come to meet her loved ones. Melly and Melby embarrassedly lowered their eyes, wiping the tears that were still protruding in their eyes, and from the bottom of their hearts, sincerely thanked the owner of this place for such kindness and understanding. Brother and sister left the door of the restaurant, happily hand on the last. It was in this way that the rumor about the search for the child spread throughout the city, gradually subsided. Everything was resolved by itself, and now you can go on with your normal life. But there was something else that troubled Allison. That night when they returned from the tower, he had a very strange dream. Selly was walking through a completely white city, and suddenly someone approached her, asking if the girl was alone. The girl, without much suspicion, with the same cheerfulness, replied that yes, she was alone, and thought it was good that her brother and sister had not gone with her. Suddenly the woman who approached her thought it was really for the best, and then asked the little stranger if she had eaten today. Selly thought at first that she had been asked, and then very quickly answered that she was not very hungry. But still the woman took her by the hand, saying that children always say that, and asked her to go with her, promising that her aunt would feed her, and they went the other way down the street of the town. When they arrived at their destination, the woman pushed her plate closer to the girl, and on it lay 3 pancakes that were drizzled with honey and had a piece of butter glistening on top of them. Immediately Selly began to scream at the top of her voice, admiring what she saw, namely the pancakes. Then the woman realized that she had already tasted them, and asked if they had already been cooked for her. The girl answered with perfect sincerity that yes, and she just loves pancakes. The little girl began to almost choke on them, enjoying the flavor, and the stranger asked her if these pancakes tasted better than the ones she had already eaten, boasting that no one could achieve such a combination as she did. And after chewing a little, Selly replied that they tasted the same as the ones she had already tasted, and added that they were delicious. The little girl was all glowing with happiness that she could taste this dish again, and the woman was very surprised that they tasted the same as the ones she had already cooked. And it seems that the woman with brown hair understood everything. She at first couldn't even believe what she had just heard, realizing that this was only possible in one case, and if it was really true, she was very happy about it. But to make sure, she asked if it was a little girl eating at the guy's restaurant. Sedley shuddered with surprise and joy, and immediately said that her sister and brother were there, and then asked how the woman knew about Ella. Then the dream allowed her to see the face of the one who met the girl in the other world. It was Allison's mom, and she said with the cutest face that the auntie, meaning herself, wanted to know more about them and their restaurant, and then added if her new friend would like to be served another portion. It was such a sudden moment for Ella that he jumped up, coming out of the dream. For him it was as if he was seeing them for real. And very soon came the realization that it was a dream. Although it was nice, the guy still could not come to himself, as if he had seen a nightmare. But this effect was caused only by the fact that the dream had a lot of unexpected turns. Now he was thinking about his mom. He didn't expect to see these two important people in the same dream. Now it was clear why the taste of pancakes for Selly seemed so familiar. Because Allison took this recipe directly from his mother. Sitting up with a dazed look on his face, Allison suddenly heard someone waking up next to him. It was Rurin, and she asked him if he had dreamt about the girl too. She pestered at the crivati. As it turned out, the dragon had also dreamt of Selly, but judging by how confused Elle was, his dream was more complete and emotionally colored. But no. Rurin began to describe that the girl was a woman, that she smelled exactly like Elle. And then the guy fell out of his senses, not believing that it could really be. If they had dreamed the same dream, and the girl did not recognize his mother, because she had never seen her in person. But now the boy was sure that Selly would never be hungry again. He began to wipe away the tears that suddenly appeared in his eyes, and Rurin immediately supported him by hugging him. And the archmage was more and more sure that it was not just a dream, but a vision from the world where souls stay after death. The evening city was not crowded with people. Everyone was running about their business. Some were returning home after a day's work. Some were just crawling out into the street to stroll under the red sun that was about to set over the horizon. And, of course, on the most crowded street sat the local beggar, his face covered by the hood of his cloak, asking for food, asking for just 1 coin. And some took pity on him. There were already 3 coins in his bowl, and now someone tossed another. And the poor man did not hide his gratitude, saying this to the man, calling him respectable. This did not suit only the chef of the restaurant near which this beggar was sitting. It was not the first time he appeared here. Last time he was rummaging through the garbage. The man who was coming out of the premises with a big bowl full of water asked what this man was doing near his restaurant again, and immediately splashed all the water right on the poor man, as if he were a stray animal, shouting at him, chasing him away from the place, telling him to get out of here as quickly as possible, because it spoils the reputation of the establishment. Who would want to enter a restaurant near which beggars hang around? And so the beggar revealed his face, counting the coins in his bowl. He said that the leftovers he tasted weren't that good anyway. It was a man with a scar on his forehead he had met in Allison's life before, and kept wishing he could try a bowl of rice from that very restaurant, even though no one leaves food there. The man who kicked the beggar out hurried inside, thinking about how unlucky he was today, and the homeless man decided to think hard, and decided it was a restaurant too. He licked his lips, trying to suppress his saliva, realizing that this restaurant, and Allison's competitor, had really good food too. As it turns out, this was a special assignment for the night. He pulled his hood back over himself, thinking about staying focused on his secret mission, and headed onward. After all, he wasn't here to chill. Soon enough the man was in a dark alley, where the night seemed even darker. There were ruined abandoned houses all around, not a soul on the streets. Everyone knew that it was very dangerous to walk here in the middle of the night. He moved on, hoping that they would come soon. They always choose deserted places, and whether on purpose or by accident, because of his hood, he did not notice how people gathered around him, how a rope flashed in front of his face, and hands with something like a bag were hanging over his head. 2 robbers attacked him, twisted him, prevented him from seeing the world around him. Because of the bag on his head, they were very glad that at last some man had fallen into their hands. And then they realized that it was a guy. The partner said that he didn't care about that. They wouldn't bother about the sex. And the man, who turned out to be the captive, asked very inarticulately who these people were. Inarticulately because the obstacle on his head prevented the sounds from passing normally. He played a shudder in his voice as he begged for mercy, thinking that it was not he who had fallen into the trap, but these guys who had fallen for the free cheese in the mousetrap. And he was very glad that everything had worked out, but it was better not to be happy in advance. He didn't know that for sure. This whole story had its roots in the city of Dedran. After getting rid of the corrupt officials and criminal gangs, the city had a more peaceful atmosphere. Everyone who was involved in what was said earlier had been imprisoned. The common people and the defenders of this city began to respect the new lord and shouted in praise. The lord of this city was Ruran. They were very proud that the city of Dedran is finally free. It seems that it is safe to live here again, and the common people will not think how to live in such a rotten government. But suddenly a knight came out from behind them. The main knight. He had a red robe on his shoulders. He asked them not to rejoice too much. It was very loud in the streets, and it was not worth attracting unnecessary attention. He fixed his hair, saying that they were helped by a man with a good heart. Everyone knew who he was talking about. The man added that the help, without casualties this battle would not have been possible, and now everything was in the best possible way. But it was better not to shout so loudly about it. The man slightly undermined the morale and good mood, saying that all who fought should remember that the places they once closed their eyes, now flooded with the blood of their comrades. Immediately the faces of many changed. They remembered the lost comrades, and finally realized at what price they all got it. At that very moment he changed his mood. He covered his eyes and put on a soft pleasant smile. He said that it was not so bad after all. He noted that for new recruits, these guys did just fine. And with these words he brought back the good mood of all those who fought for their city, for its freedom. The fighters, among whom there were many lazy in the past, shouted after him as he left, that they would try harder. And the knight, without turning around, just summarized that you bet, because now they will have to train much harder. This was just the start of their activities. Who knows what awaits them in the future? But suddenly he was stopped by a woman's voice, addressing him. The knight stopped and looked around, but tried not to turn his head. That was his constructed image, a real commander, who does not put himself on equal footing with his assistants. There stood the ordinary citizens of this city, who also tried to defend his honor. They expressed their great gratitude to the man for giving them a chance to stand up for themselves. They were very happy with the victory, and now they believed in their strength even more. One of the women came closer, saying that even though the count had saved them from slavery, they were living in fear of being caught and sold again. She expressed her personal opinion that she was very happy that now they could finally fight back. The man took it with an unwavering face, but still showed that he was very happy to hear it. The knight thought that this was something that the people could no longer worry about, and shared that he had heard that Count Rivlock, that is Allison, for they could no longer hide his real identity, had destroyed the slave cells. The girl lowered her gaze. For a moment she was overcome with sadness, and she shared what was troubling her. Some of them are starting to remember the past, because the brainwashing is slowly disappearing, and there are far from the best memories. And then she added that they remembered they were brought to Dedran from some other place. It wasn't the only Arab enterprise. It shocked the man. The fight against the slave owner wasn't over yet. That's what he realized. Somewhere out there is still a place where people are bullied, taking away their freedom. If only it wasn't for the loss of his memory, this could have been figured out sooner. Now the knight was walking down the dark corridor of the dungeon, looking at his cuffed hands. He was not alone. There were many of them here, in rags, chains. They were all being pushed around, ordered to move. Now it was clear. It was all true. He was undercover. He could now see everything that should have been destroyed in their world. At the table sat a man. In his hands was a quill, and on the table lay a piece of paper, in which was written very many names. Not acquainted looked everyone who passed inside. And suddenly the knight became very worried. He didn't think that his face would be recognized, but there was a chance that there were some of the soldiers there, and they would definitely expose him. So he searched his head and came up with the idea that he should have asked Madarin to use an illusionary spell. But it was too late. He could only hope that he wouldn't be recognized. When he got closer to the man who was in charge of the slave list, he told him that he had a good physique and would be good for the auction. The disguised slave said nothing but sighed heavily with a look of fear and sadness. He was immediately put in a cell. The door was closed with iron bars. The man felt uncomfortable. He thought only that he had to wait until dawn. Then his investigation would continue. He hoped to learn as much information as possible in the shortest amount of time he was here. Looking around, he realized that it was not that hard to escape. The main thing was to remember where everything was, and then quietly escape and report everything. He could not reveal his identity, because this way these bastards would have time to cover their tracks. And, of course, the backup was not prepared in advance, because no one knew whether it seemed to be true or not. Having been here only a couple of minutes, he had already seen heartbreaking scenes, such as when a brother and sister were separated from each other, screaming and begging to be allowed to leave together. But the guards of this place did not care at all. They were following orders, being cold to such passions. It was hard for him, as a man of honor, to watch all this. He could not bear such horrible fates of innocent people who got here not of their own free will. But now he could not do anything. He had to play the same man, who was tormented by fate. And he, not in luck for himself, got here because the girl was too loud, and demanded what she was not supposed to. She was immediately sent to the post, and the man began to beat her with a whip, swinging it hard. You could see the blood coming out of her back, and now the girl asked only to be spared, asked for forgiveness, even though she was not guilty of anything and was just trying to make sure that her younger brother was under her protection. It all made you think about how cruel this world is. It was absolutely unbearable to look at this picture. So the man soon lowered his head. A strong sense of justice was playing in him. But now you cannot ruin the operation. Because of him, the screams echoed through this dark underground dungeon. They were a warning to everyone. What will happen to everyone if they do not obey? His hands were shaking, but not from fear, but from anger. He clenched his fists hard to keep his emotions in. He looked at the handcuffs on his wrists, and already recognized what he had originally known, that such a mission was not for him. He could not stand by while innocent people were being bullied. It seems he couldn't contain himself and started to run towards the fence where the guard was standing. The man noticed too late how the prisoner was bearing down on him. The last thing he could say was to ask what he was trying to do. Immediately a shout was heard from that side, but it was too quiet. But it was enough for the other guards to turn around to see what was going on. And then there was a distinctive metallic sound. The man who had been put in that cage not too long ago was able to get out. He was saying that he couldn't stand by when something like this happened. His hands were already holding the sword he had taken from the guards that were guarding him. It was a disaster, but they didn't think it was anything critical. They just needed to calm the slave who had rebelled. So they immediately shouted to everyone to gather, telling them to be careful, because this man had a weapon. The knight in robes stood in front of this crowd, and wanted to fill these people in on something, namely about the laws of the empire. Meanwhile, in the restaurant was a measured life. Everything was back to normal. As after every adventure, they returned to this place and spend their best days. At the moment, Allison put a plate with an appetizing dish on the table. It was braised ribs. He showed how to cook them. The owner of the restaurant asked his chef how he liked the dish, and the guy replied admiringly that it smelled great. He would have eaten it, swallowing it whole, but he was more interested in the pot that was on the table. It looked quite unusual, and then Elle explained that it was a pressure cooker, and it was great for cooking ingredients evenly over high heat, so they wouldn't burn. And then he explained that he used magic himself, but it would be problematic for this guy, so he brought such a pot. The assistant didn't really understand. He was far from knowing how to use it. Something new always causes fear and anxiety that something won't work, but it's worth getting used to and learning. And then the guy noticed that his boss was going somewhere, so he respectfully asked where he was going again. Allison was silent at first and then gave a not particularly detailed answer about how sometimes you just need a change of pace. There were a lot of customers in the restaurant. One of the men was just tearing into the meat in his teeth that was brought to him. It was so delicious. You wanted to savor the taste of it at the same time, and devour it completely, from how appetizing it looked and the smell that came from it. It was the barber. His name was Jaunt, and he could hardly tear himself away from the food, and only to express his emotions. He said that it was just incredible. You could see it in his eyes. They were wide open and shining, as if a muse had come to him. He could not tear himself away from the dish. The meat just melted in his mouth. It was so amazing that he felt ecstasy. His wife was sitting next to him and she was very concerned about the way her husband was behaving. She asked him to behave like a decent person and quietly asked if it was necessary to do so in front of everyone. The man only replied that it was the way to eat meat, and the woman couldn't help but agree that it was indeed uncomfortable with a knife. But she still didn't encourage such behavior in a public place. And suddenly a girl came up to them with a plate in her hands, and she only confirmed it. It was Rurin. She explained that the problem was that this meat was quite difficult to cut with a normal knife, and held out the plate, saying that she had brought wet towels. Now you could not worry about anything and just eat with your hands. The man only began to prove that he was right. He had said that before, and the good acquaintances of the hosts at the next table were just incredibly surprised. It was the first time they had seen Rurin smiling while serving food. Serena voiced her opinion that she thought the Black Dragon would be sad after what had happened, but she quickly came to her senses, and that was despite the fact that so much had been piling up on them lately, and Elena next to her was not very happy. She and this girl had their own relationship, and their own history. She looked at Rurin and couldn't believe what she knew was true, and the brunette didn't suspect anything. She was just working as a waitress, helping out at a very crowded time in a restaurant. The dungeon was a bloody mess. The fight continued, only now it was more active and violent. The guards didn't stay on their feet for long. Soon they were drenched in their own blood, falling to the floor and dropping their weapons. The knight was able to defeat all those who attacked him. He stood heroically with his sword. Under the questions of those who were dying, who was he that he was able to deal with them so easily, and not leave a single guard alive? He looked at the weapon of his hands, which was completely stained with blood, and was already lazily notching on the blade. He thought about the fact that even though it was not his sword, he still needed to train, even though he had defeated them, but that was only because these opponents were weak in fact. And then he remembered what he was doing all this for. He looked at the cages, and asked the prisoners to step back so that he could take them out. The slaves, of course, did not contradict this, only thanked him for his assistance, and thought about how strong this man was, since he had dealt with the crowd all alone. But suddenly a voice was heard behind his back, asking him what now. The knight was immediately taken aback. He became like a frozen statue. He did not expect that someone else would dare to come to him. The steps were unhurried, so the man was sure that he could not be harmed. He reasoned that first a magician of noble origin staged a coup, and now a slave with a ball. It was just unprecedented. It was a familiar man who was already in the black business, both selling and buying slaves. He was very unhappy, resentful. How long would it be before he would come across such a thing? He himself, approaching, bare his saber. The cold blade gleamed from the torches that were burning in the dungeon. The man with a naive voice asked to do him a favor. He already has a lot of problems and he has a hard time, and to deal with another rulebreaker he did not want at all. But the knight didn't wait long to be reprimanded and attacked. He gripped the ball handle harder, turned around, and said that she had heard of this man. He was one of the escaped from Dedran, and his name was Ruran. He stood on alert, aiming a calm at his opponent, and then asked who he really was, and why he was still doing this. Night had fallen outside. The lights were no longer on in many of the houses, but in the study, in the manor, its owner was not at all sleepy. The heir to the empire was looking at the map. There were needle tips on it. He couldn't believe that this was the real truth. These marked territories were shown to him for a reason. This was a huge problem for the empire, and they were all tied to the slave trade. Leon took his head in his hands. He became desperate. There were too many of them than expected, and sooner or later, they would have to be dealt with in order to save and not lose respect for the Luveran Empire. The emperor sat across from him and said that as sad as it was to realize that, unfortunately, it probably wasn't even all of them. It was a very sad fact, and there was no way to deal with it quickly. And then he asked his son if he had met Allison, and the young prince, taking a hard look at the maps that marked all the trouble spots in their empire, replied that yes, they had seen each other. He remembered that the archmage had mentioned it the last time he had visited the palace. He had asked to see if there were any more Arabian cells in the empire, and they had put the knight to study the different areas, and eventually this map had been constructed. Unfortunately, the results were not at all happy. Then when Leon heard about his father, the guy told him that he thought it was important for the crown prince to hear about it, and it was better to learn about it directly than have someone retell it to him. At the time the blonde didn't believe it, but now it was completely different. Leon was just horrified. Now he realized what it was all about. The young man was happy that everything was fine in Dedran. Well, missed the view of the most important thing, and now we'll have to deal with these problems. He hadn't realized that the scale was so large, all the cameras arranged so meticulously and precisely. It was becoming embarrassing that they hadn't noticed it before. He was horrified. It was a disgrace to him, a disgrace to the empire. Even an ordinary lord would have a hard time dealing with all this. That was how he found excuses for himself. And then he wondered if that was also behind it all. And suddenly a thought came into his head that was like a lantern in a dark alley that gave some light to this situation. He clasped his hand, which was already sweating with worry, and turned to his father. He wanted to discuss that many people say that one of the survivors of the destruction of the Arab enterprise in Dedran was a member of the Order of Knights. He thought he could find a clue to this, or at least a clue that would help them deal with the problem. The information about the commander of the First Order. His name was Adrian Pierce. If the operation on the information he had, the man had been reported missing in the first days of the war, and asked the emperor if it was really so. And immediately, without holding any particular intrigue, said that he thought it was him who was standing at all. The emperor was very surprised at such a statement. He had not expected to hear that name. How could a knight do such a thing? It simply did not fit in his mind. But he still thought about it seriously. He rumbled, paused for a moment, and then announced that an ordinary man would definitely not have been able to arrange it, but he still doubted that it could be true. And Leon now felt embarrassed because he could not convince his father of his thought. But the old man didn't stop thinking about it. He said that when he was promoted, the prince was already trained abroad. He put his hand to his face thinking about all this, and then he remembered that Allison said that that swordsman was between 20 and 30 years old. And the commander of the First Order is about the age of the emperor. Is he alive? Then he is about 60 years old. This amazed the heir to the empire. he exclaimed, reconsidering if this is exactly what he heard. He was very surprised by this. It was at that age that it was assumed he wouldn't be able to run an entire slave monopoly. Meanwhile, the knight who was working undercover was fighting the enemy, and unfortunately, he wasn't doing so well. His sword was shattered to pieces. Ruran was able to release the blood of his enemy. Out of a cold stare, he stated that there would be an end, and added that he was completely disappointed in the knight who was showing such a good result, but couldn't last long in the battle with him. There were various things lying on the floor, such as a backpack, stir something, boot time, and of course everything you need to cook on a camping trip. Allison and Rurin stood over it all and wondered if it would be enough. The girl said it did look good. It looked like they were going somewhere again. Rurin walked over to the bags and then looked at Ella and said it reminded her of the good old days when they moved around a lot. The guy clarified, she was those times. After the girl had absorbed the orb, the dragon reached into the dresser to see that they hadn't forgotten anything. Maybe something would catch her eye and she decided to take it too. But there was a red cloth lying there. Immediately the girl realized what it was and turned to the guy. Rurin pulled out a red mask with cutout eyes and a rope around her neck to emphasize her head, asking Allison if he would take this with him too. The archmage thought about it at first and then replied that no, they wouldn't need it. A smile appeared on the outside because it was only now starting to dawn on him how ridiculous they looked in those masks. They headed for the exit. The guy justified his decision not to take this mask by saying that now they wouldn't have to do the street stall, and then added that they wouldn't have to do the restaurants either. It sounded weird. After all, it was their life's work. How could they leave the restaurant? Meanwhile, events returned to the knight who was just defeated by Ruran, who ended the mutiny and was even disappointed in the abilities of his opponent, who he had high hopes for. He thought this fight wouldn't be as quick. He was not even indignant, but very much in anger, naturally rejoicing that the vice commander was in such a condition. He thought the end of the First Order had come, if that was the case, and even thought it would have been better for him to have disappeared when the war first broke out and not pushed himself to such disappointing events. He added that he was too hastily rebuilt anyway, and suddenly his speech was interrupted by an abrupt change of events. From his hands the weapon was simply snatched away. Well-to-do it did not work. Ruran forward, straight to the enemy. He staggered through the pipes of those who worked here as guards, began to reflect on the fact that this slave once was a soldier, but decided not to ask how he knew his name. The knight was able to still put up, and began to resist, saying that the first organ should not talk in this way. He began to get angry, and even the wounds and abrasions on his body will not make him give up so easily. The criminal authority took a sniffle, and objected that it was too careless remark. He thought that this guy managed to survive only because he dodged the blow when the sword broke, but it was still a question, because he didn't see it in his eyes. And then the fight continued. The men came together, clashing their weapons. From this came a great shockwave that scattered around everything but them. They held firmly on their feet, knowing what they were fighting for. Everyone had their own motive and their own motivation to win here. And in the emperor's palace, the slave trade was still being solved, while someone was fighting for it in one of the points of this criminal business. It was not even surprising to the emperor now, but at first he didn't believe that it was possible. He brought up the subject of that guy, Ruran. He uses martial arts in the First Order, which took Leon out of it altogether. He didn't expect to hear that. This information only made his guess more true and possible. After all, the peer commander usually traveled all over the empire to train his students. There were a lot of people who wanted to get into his training, know that this knight was very outstanding, and could give them the same glory and power. He systematized and honed his techniques, sharing them with all who were willing to learn. He hoped that someone would surpass him. He never spared information for his students. He wanted to raise another great warrior who would be even better than him. That's the kind of man he was. He didn't spare knowledge, and acted only in a way that was better for others. He wanted to create incredible knights who would be able to defend their country. The heir to the empire thought about all this for a long time, and came to the conclusion, putting all these facts into one, that guy, Ruran, is so strong because of the commander, and this did not reassure him, because training into a better knight could not give him ineffective abilities and strength. Defeating him will be very difficult indeed. He is quite dangerous. There was no doubt about that. The fact that he escaped from Ellis on his own proves that he is an unusual person. Moreover, there are probably dragons involved in the tree, which makes solving this problem much harder and more risky. He recalled Ellis' words that still, anyone who tries to plunge the Ruben Empire into chaos with him will not be able to continue living a peaceful life. and all because he would be forced to face him, not as a restaurant owner, but as a mage, and even so, he hadn't managed to completely defeat this guy. Although there was hope that he hadn't used all his powers, Leon had a very nervous state. He clutched the map with his hand, which was marked with the places where there was still slave trade. He turned to his father, saying that this case was much more dangerous than they had assumed and they had no choice. We dared to suggest that they should immediately request Allison's help. Without him this case would be lost. They need a player in this battle as powerful and dangerous as the enemy. Maybe then everything would be resolved. Then the Emperor covered his face with his hand, thinking about it. He couldn't say it from the beginning, and even now it took him a long time to decide. But still it was a fact that couldn't be hidden. He was sorry, but he had to admit that it was impossible now, for certain reasons. This night was very disturbing. In one place political issues were being solved, while in another place the same issues were being solved with a battle. Incredible power was bursting from the blades of two knights who were fighting to the death. Ruran was still the leader in this battle, but his enemy did not give up, tried to defend, and even attack. And then it came to the man who was trying to defend the rights of the people that it was the same ball technique as his. Except the problem was that he didn't know about this guy's skill level, and she seemed to exceed him several times over. He avoided the fatal blow, only because he knew where his opponent would hit. It felt like he was testing it on purpose, but why he would do that was still unclear. Why he wouldn't hit continuously to destroy his opponent. And now Ruran hit so that the man had to bounce back. A wave of a there and then hit them. There was a small break, but it was unclear whether it would be good or ruin everything. The glorious knight tried to catch his breath, and thought about how to defeat the enemy, analyzing his abilities, and recognized the skill he used. Even the voice appearance was very familiar to him. He does not want to admit it, but these people he thought of were too similar, and he tried to at least talk to find out a little more about it. So he asked him if he was the son of the man he thought he was, and he replied that he was sorry, but he was older than he looked. Ruran waited for his opponent to act. He was already swinging his saber at his enemy, and his opponent seemed to be more shalom from the information he had just learned, and was completely unable to resist the attack that was moving at him, only watching it with widened eyes. It was just incredible. It was very hard to believe, but just now he received a direct answer. At that time the entire dungeon began to collapse, heard the screams of those who were still alive, and fell under the debris of stones that fell from the ceiling, from the walls, and so far it was unknown whether the son of a noble knight was able to defeat his opponent. But the knight was able to put up, fending off this attack, all thinking about what he had just learned. He would have to believe what he had just heard, and fight knowing this, knowing what power his opponent had. Suddenly Ruran found himself face to face with his opponent trying to crush his defense. He looked at him with a completely brutal look, and said that he had already mentioned that this was not how it was done. It was as if he wanted to be a mentor. Only what kind of mentor tries to teach his student how to handle a ball in such a brutal fight? His opponent was completely dumbfounded. He didn't understand what it was all about. He was struck to my heart. Cold sweat began to descend from his forehead. It was just incredibly amazing. He looked at his eyes, trying to see something familiar there, so that the fact that he had learned only confirmed. Although the evidence was already too much, memories took him back to the past, when he was practicing with the ball, and summoning an already very powerful force, letting all the energy out, and at that moment he heard what he was doing wrong. That's not how a lunge kick is done. The guy stopped to catch his breath and look at the one who was giving him advice. Then Lada's foot stepped on the ground so firmly that energy passed over it. He was explaining that you take a step, you have to hold yourself firmly, without hesitation. Explore behind your hands, but don't twist your hands. The way he handled the sword was simply amazing. It seemed like you could watch it forever. It was powerful yet graceful, all the things that allowed for a good strike. And then the cut that the knight who wanted to teach the guy something made went through the ground, destroying everything around him. The thick wood fence that had stood for a very long time in this place was destroyed, shattered into little splinters. The knight who was training him came closer, and took off his helmet, but his face was not visible yet. As he stood with his back to the boy, he ordered him to memorize the technique, and that is what he would use. Then the better son was finally given a chance to spread his face. He gave another instruction that if you hold the brass correctly, he wouldn't miss. It was the commander of the first squad of knights of the Imperial Palace, Adrian Pierce, not the youngest man. His hair was already gray as well as his long beard. In his gaze you could see all the battles he had lived through, and his sword gave no doubt that this was his loyal friend and assistant, the still very young Green lad, who already had a scar on his forehead from the battle, looked at the commander, being still as amazed by this technique. He wished he could achieve the same skill, and tried to consolidate in his head what he had just been shown. This area was now scrawled across the hole in the ground that was left from the commander's blow. And after all, they had just leveled it. Well, the man wasn't about to leave, leaving behind a ruined area for him to practice on. He picked up a shovel to return everything to the state it was in before his demonstration of the blow. And immediately the guy he was counseling about the blow decided to strike up a conversation about what he had heard about the skirmish at the palace. It was all about the nobles being against the commander traveling and teaching them swordsmanship. To which the gray-haired man replied that this was always the case. They asked why they would want to increase the military power and influence of others. They wanted the strongest cases of war to be just them, while the famous knight was fixing all the things that made his powers. Then said that despite this, a sword left aside would simply rust. He would not let his skill fade away. There must be someone to take and use those abilities. He was determined to pass it on endlessly, to hone and perfect it. He would share it until the very end. Only then would someone take it up. The cycle would repeat itself, an endless cycle of growth and evolution. He wanted to achieve infinite possibilities. This is the greatest power of mankind. And the guy who was standing next to him was surprised by this. He had not yet met people who were not greedy for their knowledge, and wanted someone else to have the same powerful abilities. The guy then decided that he would be a good candidate, and said that you can fulfill this wish. To which the commander replied to him that if he creates even more perfect skill, he will gladly accept it. Only for this you need to try very hard. The sun was beginning to set, and at this close of the day, the lad replied that, under such conditions, he would do anything, would try to the last to become this man's apprentice, and would gladly ask him for instruction when the day came that he would become an apprentice. These memories caused very violent emotions in the man now. He very much melded onto Ruran, asking him with a full voice of aggression how he would even manage to impersonate the commander who had trained him. It was incredibly selfish. After all, he had honed his skills day and night, from his time as an infantryman until he was appointed deputy captain. He wanted to inherit the skill and fulfill his teacher's wish, not to speak empty words, only showing his meanness. His attacks became stronger. Enraged, he tried to defeat this man, but his opponent was only getting the better of him. He realized that the knight was losing concentration when given to emotion. It was too predictable, and was not good for this guy. He looked at the body in front of him that emitted nothing but aggression and anger, rage that he tried to put into his sword, and realized that he hadn't changed at all, not him or his skill. As the guy attacked, Ruran thought about how easy it all was, how easy it was to emotionally overwhelm this man. It seemed to him that he hadn't learned anything at all, only become even more stupid, not thinking about the fact that vivid emotions could hurt in battle. In this analysis, he didn't notice how the knight went through him, hitting him in the shoulder, from which blood was now gushing, while he was saying words that this guy dare not insult the heritage of Commander Pierce. It was completely unexpected that in such a flood of emotions, will be able to produce such an attack. The opponent's eyes opened wide, but he did not feel pain, but only pleasure, from finally feeling it, felt that those lessons had not gone without a trace. A smile appeared on his face, which with every second only packed more into his blood. He wanted this guy to show him his full potential. It was as if he was dissolving in his desire to find a stronger opponent, and in this fight, to the death, to find out who would be stronger after all. He ordered this guy not to talk nonsense about legacy. Quickly he moved against him and hit the ball, only to have the tip hit the shield. There was a distinctive metallic sound. Again a strong wave spread around from those abilities, and suddenly their fight was interrupted by a voice. The two worthy wielders of the ball distracted words that called out that he should stop already. They didn't expect anyone to dare to get into this fight. This was the dragon that Allison had been able to defeat. He was holding one of the guards hostage, put a magic circle on him, and talked about how this guy had something to say. The men were dumbfounded, Ruran asking who it was, and the captivity, calling out to Sir Ruran, trying to make him aware of something that bothered and disturbed him greatly, making him nervous and even screaming. He spoke of the mage behind him, of it being a huge disaster, and judging by his consternation, it was true, and it wasn't worth wasting energy on personal interactions just yet. Meanwhile, the Emperor's his son was dealing with an issue that still remained unresolved. Leon stood up, addressing his father. He asked in what sense they could not ask the archmage for help. He didn't understand how asking for help could be impossible. The guy switched to shouting, realizing even that he was talking to the emperor, to his father, whom he should respect. He claimed he knew. He wanted to live in peace, but there are exceptions, especially if the man's help is very much needed. The blonde man completely started to freak out and walk away, saying that if it was too much trouble he would go to him himself and deal with the matter. But suddenly the emperor said that was not the case at all, and it was not worth even making the attempt. He felt his beard, explaining that his son just misunderstood everything. He would have no problem asking the archmage for help, and it was impossible to mean something completely different. In fact, the ruler had already sent the letter 2 days ago. That was what the word impossible meant. He had foreseen the fact that they would come to this decision. Leon was shocked. He didn't think his father would do this. Now he realized that Allison had already most likely made a decision. So regarding, and perhaps things were already being resolved. Now in the dungeon where the slaves were being held, the knight who was being held hostage was talking about an attack. He was very panicked. He was talking about reports coming to them. It was everywhere. The city of Luthien, which had the same slave trade, announced it. The city of Shadman, which was also marked on the map in the Emperor as a place where black deeds were going on, was also telling the attack. And the city of Lunatar had announced that they were under attack, but it was already very hard to do anything about it, considering how long these denunciations could go on. Ruran was standing Shalom Lena, listening to this information. As it turns out, everything they were running, everything was falling apart like dominoes. The guy couldn't believe it. They were trying to keep everything Tanya. Even in case they were attacked, they had ways to fight back. Now in all these points everything was burning with fire. The guards who were guarding the cages with slaves, screaming, trying to save their lives, ran away, but it was very difficult to do it in a closed room. The fire was raging everywhere, and suddenly a silhouette appeared behind it. All the black business workers could see was the emblem, and they just could not believe their eyes. It seemed to them that it was simply impossible, especially when they saw the sign closer. It was an emblem with a huge number of circles that spoke of the rank of this magician. They were so shocked. They immediately realized that they were war heroes, and just to stay alive, they begged for mercy, begged for forgiveness. But the one who came to them wasn't enough. He said that he had had enough of all this, and then he pointed his hand in their direction, with which magic burst out. The war hero was saying that he didn't want people like these people to call him a hero. He wasn't doing all this for such scum. It was Allison. He immediately used 8th rank magic. Everything around him glowed green, and a sphere appeared in front of him. It seemed to be shapeless. It was from it that the hue came off. Everything took on an ominous color. It was clear that he had come here to restore order. All those who served in this business, involved in keeping people down, calling them slaves, immediately began to run away, saving their lives. But the green flames were already heading after them. No one could avoid them. They didn't know about it yet, and all they could do was hope that they would survive. The archmage cast the inferno spell, and a beam burst out of the ground, spilling the stone entrance to this dungeon where the people were being held illegally. It was now clear that there was no way out. The beam only intensified, piercing with it all the materials that were used to build the dungeon. The sound was simply impossible to tolerate. Now everything outside was also turning green from the rays of this ability. At the place of the entrance was now a huge hole. Some particles of stones were flying in the air because of this power. Everything was like on fire, in a green mist. This is incredibly powerful magic, which now the guy was not afraid to use, in order to restore justice. The guy stood in his own magic. His face was hidden so that no one could recognize him. He was very happy that finally something was finally cleared up, and at least one place that worked to keep slaves and then sell them had been destroyed. Everyone who was imprisoned in that shadow had chosen to be outside and were now giving great thanks to the archmage who had saved them. They booed and praised him. They know they will now tell everyone what kind of hero saved them. But that was not the end of the surprises for them. They had more to eat, because this man, a true hero, had brought with him water and food, which was all packed. You can't leave people who have been starved and thirsty for so long without proper attention. And in addition, he informed the people that if they went along one of the paths where he pointed his finger, they would come across a warrior. It was him they should ask for help, because he would protect them. It turned out that he did not come alone. He took with him others who could take care of the people while he was freeing others. One woman was even a little scared. It turns out the legend was true. She promised she would never forget the archmage. One of the men admired him, saying he looked like a real hero. No wonder those bad guys were scared and tried to save their lives. One of the women remarked that the guy was too handsome and assumed he was a woman. But a child who was also rescued remarked that the man was ugly, and the girl standing next to him, either his mother or his sister, asked him to be quiet because it was too rude, especially considering what he had just done for them. Well, what can you take from a child who doesn't really understand anything yet? It seems this spell the guy cast wasn't to hide his face at all. It was to change it, but the purpose was the same, not to leave a recognizable mark. People assumed that so many scars should be an indicator and trace from the war. The guy headed onward. He went through a portal and found himself in a forest. His hand swept across his face, removing the spell that helped hide his identity. There was already waiting for him there, a female voice, obviously Rurin. She had been waiting for him and was glad that he was finally there. Allison, on the other hand, confirmed that he had finally ended up at this place. As it turned out, Rurin was not chilling at this time either. She was helping to destroy another place where slaves were being held. She was sitting on a rock, and across from her was a whole settlement that was now consumed by blue fire. They were intentionally heading to the next location to free the people there. Meanwhile, the knight rescuing Ruran. For the moment, Mac, who was a dragon, healed his wounds, explaining that it might hurt a bit, and then used another spell, saying that it was quite dangerous. All that was happening there in the dungeon. He asked if the man was all right, and here he was as if he was spellbound. He thought about what had just happened to him, but thanked the man anyway and said that he had already heard something about him. He knew that the man was the dragon who had cured Count Ruran, though Elle and Rurin had made him do it, and he also knew him, Iramantium. The dragon was silent and looking him in the eye. He didn't think that the fame of him had already spread. The man admitted that he never expected not to meet in such a place. His companion decided to be truthful, saying that he wasn't going to interfere, but then a fight broke out and he just couldn't stand by. Meanwhile, in the dungeon, those who managed to survive were surprised that the two enemies had escaped. The dragon said that it was a good thing that the man who fought the Lyceum let them go, or else he almost died. But the knight realized that this wasn't the end, and actually wished that they could meet at least one more time. This frightened the dragon completely. He said that he would not be able to fight. He would be finished off completely that way. The interlocutor was very surprised, because he asked if a dragon could say such a thing when it came to fighting a human. The dragon grasped the word man. He didn't even think that the guy was just a man. The knight didn't understand what the man was implying, and here he just asked to forget about it. They say he was just mistaken. The knight admitted that he was more concerned about the ones they left behind. They should have gone out together after all. That's what he thought. It would have been fair. But the dragon in front of him said it was fine. It wasn't like heroic words at all. Well, actually, it wasn't as it might seem at first glance. The dragon said he had already saved the day. He had done it while the knight was fighting. The man was surprised that he hadn't noticed it at all. Then the dragon led him to his lair, asking if he would like to see his dwelling. It was in the rock. It had a vise of windows, and a door with a beautiful stained glass window. The knight didn't have time to say his answer. Of course he wouldn't say no anyway. The man went inside asking how those inside were doing, and then several female voices were very happy that the dragon had returned. At home he was greeted by a few girls. They were dressed as maids, cleaning, and were very happy that the master had returned. They were already getting worried, so they asked why the master had been there for so long. The dragon surrounded by attention and touch. He laughed a little, asking if they really created him like that. The girls here said that they had waited for him for a very long time, asking him not to stay so long again. The knight stood back and looked at all this. He thought it was even a little comical. The dragon said that these were all former slaves. He had sheltered them and given them jobs, and they were now free, and he had something that would please the eye. He explained that some had had their masks washed, some just had nowhere else to go. The same goes for those they had just rescued. Some he had trained in medicine and sent to other territories. Some are working here. Some have regained their memories and returned to their homes. Those who chose to stay, especially the girls, were now taking their new uniforms to work. Iramantium began to conjure something, and again turned to the man who was now his guest. It is said that when everyone looked down on him, he was left to rely only on the magic of the mind. He was haunted by an obsessive desire to make people love him, even if they didn't want to. But after a while he realized that he couldn't get someone else's heart so easily. The knight was a little embarrassed to hear this, but since he was a guest, it was worth paying attention to the host of this place. Then the dragon realized that on many effective it is more effective to just be kind, and people will be drawn to him. He hugged the maid, who put a statement to the master that his dinner was ready, and then clarified whether he wanted to bathe first. The guest was a little dumbfounded. It seems that this strange desire still hadn't left him. He thought in regards to how this dragon wanted to take someone as a wife, and made him wear a maid's uniform. But since everyone here is happy with it, it's better not to change it. Suddenly the silence of the corridor was broken by a sharp rumble. The door of one of the rooms opened with force, as if it had been kicked out by a blow. The rumble echoed on the walls, making everyone turn around. It was obvious that the door was not opened by hand. Its surface was dented by a heel, and soon a figure appeared in the doorway. The first to appear were slender legs and a sharp heel. Stepping confidently on the threshold, the girl entered as if the space belonged to her, as if in this scene she was not just a participant but its center. She stepped out into the main room, and sadly, throwing the bag in front of her, asked how many times she should be told to clean up her room already. They were now honorary servants in this house. The dragon was immediately startled. He immediately fell to the floor, kneeling on his knees, apologized in a trembling voice, and excused himself for going to clean up, looking as if he was not the master here, but also a servant. Suddenly a sharp heel came down sharply on his back. The pain pierced him, making him wriggle from the unexpected and unpleasant pressure. The man barely held back a groan. Behind his back came the cold, sobering voice of the girl, who was displeased with such pathetic excuses. Her words were like a whip. The girl looked down at him as if he had become insignificant in her eyes. She asked where he found a bunch of slaves this time. The knight shifted his gaze to this girl, trying to get a closer look at who it was. Immediately he came to a shock, not realizing what this person was doing here. He didn't expect to see this girl here at all, considering how powerful she had shown herself to be before. It was Lady Madarin, and as soon as he said her name the girl noticed him, even a little scared. She honestly didn't think she would see someone she knew either. Immediately her face changed. She flushed. Tears spilled from her eyes. They were mixed with sweat from excitement. She didn't understand what the hell it was. Now she thought she was embarrassed. It was strange to see this change of mood, from an overbearing woman to a little girl who had to confess her love. Rurin and Elle were sitting on a blanket, among the trees. In a pot was heating food. On a plate was already lying something she had prepared. They were not going to have dinner. After such heroic deeds, they were completely exhausted. The girl noticed that it smells very delicious, and the guy replied that it would soon be ready. You should only wait a little. It was pieces of meat. They fried less along with butter. The guy said that we were great after a hard day, and it was all reminiscent of their hike. He didn't even notice that the girl was embarrassed by something. It seems that she remembered the events that happened then on the hike, and decided to talk about it after all. Well, no. She suddenly said that she had no appetite and apologized for it. Or the son was very surprised, because it was the girl never refused to eat, and given their recent physical, energetic and moral stresses, food was simply necessary. He clarified in a nervous voice if it was true, was completely confused. He had been worried about it before. He seemed to realize what the matter was, but then he didn't even pay attention to it. The girl, in order to avoid further conversation that could have been very awkward, stood up, saying that they should already move on and the matter would have to be finished by now. It was sympathy. Allison, before it was too late, asked if the girl felt guilty. She immediately stopped like a ghost. It was obvious how she froze as if turned to ice, but still tried to move. He had long ago begun to notice disturbing changes. The brunette, always so lively, bright, with a sparkle in her eyes, suddenly faded. She refused to eat delicious food, which she used to reach for with pleasure, began to avoid conversations, even the simplest. She was not interested in walks, or movies, or the usual joys. She seemed to disappear from this world, gradually dissolving into her silence. Allison watched her with growing anxiety. He kept thinking that he knew what was wrong. Something was gnawing at her inside, something she couldn't handle alone, and though she tried to hide it under a mask of indifference, he could feel her pain and he wasn't going to stand by. Drops of photos started running down the girl's body. She didn't expect this conversation to continue, so she tried to justify herself, saying that when she sat idle her face immediately popped up in front of her. As it turned out, it was all about the girl they had lost not so long ago. She began to be overwhelmed with emotion, and the sign of this was the tears that came out for good. She explained that she didn't want another child to suffer Selly's fate, so there was no time to chill. It was a trauma for her that she seems to be carrying through her life for a long time to come. Allison couldn't leave her. He wanted her to get rid of these emotions. He explained that he used to be the same way. He took the girl's hand to support her and do his best to make her not sad. He recalled the time when it was the 3rd year of the war. After he graduated from the academy, he was sent to the front lines. These were hard events of his life, and we would not like to go back to them, but he had already grown up because of it, so he could talk about it calmly. The guy labored day and night fighting monsters. The only ones left were skin and bones, and the blood that followed. Those he saved remembered him forever, talking about the very magician who continued their lives, considering him the most real killing machine. They discussed the fact that he finished all the monsters alone. It was just incredible power. But for the guy, even though he had already been introduced, a real warrior, it was not enough. He came to the tent, where he was already waiting. His face was serious. He was then almost always in such a mood, as if he was always ready for battle. In front of him sat the commander of the 2nd Company Dagos, and this was the 8th Infantry Regiment. The man praised the lad for doing a good job, and wanted him to at least get some rest, because things should be quiet until tomorrow, so there was no need to overdo it. But the guy asked him for the next combat unit to be named, and headed there. The commander was surprised that this guy wasn't going to stop. Everyone needs a rest. Sooner or later it wouldn't lead to anything good. He closed his eyes and in a slightly dissatisfied tone asked the guy to listen to him. Thanks to him they had made a lot of progress and they were very grateful to him. But it was not necessary to exert oneself so much. One day one's strength would run out and it was better to restore it in time. Realizing that this guy would not stop, he added that his words about rest were not a request, but an order, and then added that he should eat and rest, even if it was not long. It was still better than exhausting himself with such fights. The hot bathtub covered the whole room with steam. The guy had recently bathed. Ro relaxed in the warm water. His muscles began to slowly move away from the tension. In front of him were 2 pieces of bread, a bowl of soup, and some peas. Allison carelessly stirred with a spoon the ginger that was in the plate and was not very happy with such chowder. He was in a bad mood. He wondered how many people had died. He couldn't live with the thought. He wished he could put an end to the deaths of innocent people. It seemed to him that people continued to die in droves. Even when he was just eating soup, he couldn't sit still. He wanted to do everything he could to make sure as many people survived as possible. Even such a small break he considered his disadvantage. After a little bit of refreshment, he rose abruptly, left the dishes as is on the table, and laughed nervously. An idea seemed to come into his head. It was then that the idea came to us, of opening a restaurant. He supposed it must be nice to be well fed. Not far from the camp lay the sacks in which were the corpses of all the dead. Quite suddenly the man sitting on the tower started blowing a huge hand. The sun was low. It wasn't even clear then whether it was setting or rising. This was the moment when their rest was interrupted by a rumble. The fighters were weakened, but they were immediately shouted to all to take combat readiness and be in full uniform. They couldn't get up because they were exhausted. Not much time had passed from the last battle. It was a few hours ago. Just then they were announced that a dragon had appeared on the approaches. Allison sprang to his feet and threw on his robe. He was glad that he had finally gotten a chance to challenge them. He himself was burning himself up for chilling this time and not noticing it much sooner. He was in a bad mood, and it was felt in his every movement. Clenched fists, gloomy look, tense shoulders. He was tormented by one thought. How many people had died? How many lives had been ripped from this world too soon? He couldn't just accept it as inevitable. These deaths gave him no peace. They became a heavy burden, which he carried on his soul day and night. El felt that he could not live peacefully as long as this endless cycle of violence continued. Somewhere deep inside he wished that it would all stop. The guy wanted to be the one to put an end to the senseless deaths of the innocent. Who would stop this chain of suffering, even if he had to risk everything to do so? He had already challenged one as soon as he got there, but then he was in a different place, with different skills and mindset. Already there he became the local superhero. He was known, and when he came to the rescue, everyone was very happy, but at the same time surprised that it was the mage Allison. It was a real horror. The red dragon trampled the warriors, and then walked on their pipes. There was a bunch of fire burning around. Everything was in smoke. It was simply impossible to breathe. It was a very hot fight, both literally and figuratively. but suddenly, as if out of nowhere, a blue light appeared. The ground from where it appeared was red hot. Deep lines pierced it. Those who knew whose ability it was, knew who it was that appeared on the battlefield. It was the fox. He was very angry, and in a commanding voice ordered the dragon to look at him. He wanted to challenge him to a one-on-one fight. It was his personal desire to get revenge on the one who had killed so many people that had tormented the guy for a very, very long time. It was then that he first appeared in battle with the dragon, rushing towards the huge muscular beast, his hands behind his back, conjuring magic circles. He showered the beast with insults, realizing that the fight would not be easy. It wasn't long before the commander also found out about Allison going off alone. He was very much like a fighter, warning him not to do anything stupid. One of the employees told him that the barracks was empty and they had gotten a report that he had escaped. The man then yelled asking why he wasn't stopped, and Wo answered asking how could he stop him if he just ran away. The commander's plan had been disrupted, but he was glad that it was at least Allison, and if it was this guy, then everything should be solved. But still he could not believe that he went alone against the dragon. Now the guy was just fighting with this creature. The dragon was very lazy. He did not see this man as an opponent, considering in principle times in humans very weak. The red dragon thought that he just hastened his death, and could have lived a little longer. Allison was too enraged to tolerate it. He called the magic sphere, saying that the dragon better see what this human is capable of, then already draw conclusions. Endless scrolls with the names of those who had died from this war rolled around in his head. He seemed to remember every name, and didn't denounce the pain to him. El promised, first and foremost to himself, that he would get rid of the dragon and put an end to everything. The power was being absorbed into his hands with great might. The guy would put all the power he could into the magical flow. The archmage had already attacked the dragon, while the creature didn't yet realize what was happening and what kind of power was moving towards him. A moment later there was an impact, a beam of blue light that caused Allison to collide with the body of this huge monster. But everyone realized that this fight would not end so easily. Allison sat next to Rurin, saying that it was a bit weird to talk about it, but he always knew that he was different from others, and said it not with self-centeredness, nor with a haughty note. The boy had felt that absolutely always. Back at the academy, he realized it when he left the training camp. He smiled nervously. He wanted to tell the truth so that there would be no secrets between him and his girlfriend. The guy believed that he could win, but his power only wounded the dragon, but did not kill it, and the creature seemed to realize that in front of him was an unusual fighter, saying that the one broke through the shield and even managed to wound him. He finally recognized that this opponent is quite unusual. Suddenly the archmage's face changed. It was as if he had a look of horror on his face. At that moment abruptly awakened. The next chapter now he understood why the dragon is called the embodiment of death, the flying scourge, the pinnacle of all living things. He saw this monster, his real face. The one added to his line that the guy is an unusual opponent, but only among humans. The dragon immediately summoned from its mouth a huge beam of red energy, which already approached Allison, but the guy managed to apply his abilities in time to somehow contain this force. He realized that the beam was moving too fast, and he didn't know what to do, whether to try to get back. The space was smaller than the size of his fireball, or to block the impact with a shield. Suddenly the guys grabbed him by the scruff of the neck. He was very surprised, and before he could see who it was, he was pulled to the side. The blow came from the place where Allison was standing, and dispersed in a large sphere. The wave threw the guy who saved him aside. Finally the archmage was able to turn around and see the one who saved him. The same began to shout at him, asking if he was such an idiot. Even dragons dodge it this way in breath. It was their first meeting. It was Darum and Beaten, and in the comradeship of course. The dwarf learned that this guy was second rank, but actually admitted that he thought he would have a higher rank. The elf said that despite that, he respects him for daring to fight off the breath with his shield, even though it is quite risky. The dwarf put on his helmet, turned to the guy they had just rescued and told him to be glad he wasn't going to die today. And the guy, in a shocked state, asked who these people were and how they got to this battlefield in the first place. But his saviors didn't answer, only ordered him to get out of here quickly. This creature is much more dangerous than he thought. The elf was already loading his bow with a fiery arrow. A smirk flashed across his face. He knew exactly what to do and where he was shooting. The arrow flew straight into his eye, blinding him and causing intense pain along with a fever that spread throughout his body. The dwarf took advantage of the moment the dragon was trying to subdue his pain and lunged at him, swinging his axe. flying like a missile, leaving behind a huge beam as hot as the arrow that had just blinded the dragon. Allison was shocked. He stared at it all, not getting it out of his head that what had just happened, that he was on the cusp of death. The elf looked at him. His Narikala this guy's mood. He ordered him to relax a little. Guarantees that they would make it through. No need to worry so much. He noticed that the mage had all his clothes torn from the single fights, and his raspy face gave away his desire to help everyone in the world. And then he added that he understood what kind of person he was. He admitted that this crazy stranger was pretty good. It was the first time he'd ever seen magic break through a dragon's shield. It was indeed a great skill. And the guy who'd fought the dragon, who'd finally come to his senses and started attacking back, asked him to stop talking and help him better. But the blonde went on, saying that people like this guy had one thing in common. He loaded his bow again, and finished his sentence with the fact that they all call all other people's troubles on themselves, and clouded by this mind roof in the wallpaper, completely not assessing their chances. And then he gave advice. If you don't like something, you should just say so. And if you're happy, you should enjoy the moment. If you need to rest, there should be nothing but rest. And then he added a metaphor. The stronger the bow, the harder it will break. If this guy who tried so hard to defeat the dragon alone continues like this, he definitely won't last long like this. And then revealed to him the truth that after all, he is only one man, and cannot do anything alone. It is worth thinking not only about yourself, but also others. They can come to the rescue in time, as these two just did. It is worth remembering that no one fights in this war. No one cares about all the sacrifices that have been made in this war. Suddenly a bunch more dragons gathered around, but they didn't seem to be attacking the heroes, but they were surrounding the red dragon. An order sounded to destroy the red dragon because the Lord Birthban agreement had been violated. The dragon looked at one of the fighters, and completely without anger asked if it was them again. And then the question, how they always keep up. But the dwarf did not reveal the secret, saying to deal with that dude. And that's where they parted. Continuing the wallpaper. We himself was surprised to see a dragon fighting another dragon. Finally that guy's had time to catch his breath a bit, and the low creature replied that he didn't know that this guy didn't understand anything. And then he pointed his finger forward, right at the mountain, and asked the guy to look there. On his face was a smug grin, which poked fun at the one who just now was completely confused. It seems his comrades came to Allison's aid. They were really worried about this fighter. They came as an army. The guys who came to his aid asked if he could see now that the guy wasn't alone. They clarified his name. They already knew him from somewhere, Allison, and then introduced themselves. The short guy is Darren, and the elf beside him is Beaton, and then left saying he thought they would see each other again. At the end they added that they hoped they would make it alive. It was their light humor. But Allison was not in the mood for jokes right now. His mind was spinning with the phrase that in the end, he was just one man, and could do nothing by himself. After these words, he went back to eating his soup. He hadn't thought about it since the first day of the war. This food was just awful, just like in his school years. It was just disgusting to eat. So he decided to do something that lay in his heart, thus distracting himself from all their horrors of war that he met every day. Now I became what I wanted to be all along, the owner of the restaurant. But at the moment they were on a camping trip. He was cooking scrambled eggs, and told me that he then notified the commanding officer of something he didn't expect at all. He then said that from now on he would cook everyone's food, and he did not resist. And in time he realized that he had not made a mistake. He was glad that there was a new man in this position. It seems, as Allison recalled, that he smiled then, for the first time in the whole war, because he was doing what he loved to do. He was trying to learn a lesson for Rurin from that, about not feeling guilty about his happiness. And quite unexpectedly, the girl nudged the guy with her shoulder, catching his attention, and her cheeks turned red, seemingly at that moment for embarrassment. She confessed, without looking into his eyes, that she was happy just sitting next to him, holding hands, running the restaurant together, but just eating the food he had prepared. And then she put her hand on his chest, clutching her clothes. But lately this place had started to weigh on her, asking if she should suppress the feeling. Allison said no, it was worth taking it. He couldn't get rid of it so easily anyway. His comrades on the battlefield had taught him that, and then took her hand, squeezing her fingers tightly with his fingers. He said that no matter how much the girl tries to relax, it won't come out completely anyway. A blush also appeared on his cheeks. It was a very cute moment for them both. Finally the food was ready. He laid the scrambled eggs on top of the meat. It smelled really good. It was impossible to hold back the saliva that filled his mouth. They started their meal. Allison was very happy that Rurin was finally eating, with the same appetite that she had before. And then he asked if the girl tasted good. She lived, tasted delicious, and replied that it tasted very good. It had been a long time since she had enjoyed a meal like that. Meanwhile, the red-haired girl was smoking her pipe. Every movement was the perfection of grace and perfection. She was sitting at something that looked like a bar stool and giggled when she heard someone enter. The person who approached her couldn't believe what he saw himself. He walked over and very boldly took her by the waist. He couldn't believe that there was finally a new Eriko and asked the girl if it was her first time here. The woman was dumbfounded. She didn't expect this. And suddenly a kick from his foot landed right in the man's face. He didn't expect it at all. And already he could taste the metallic taste of blood in his mouth. He fell to the floor, completely unconscious, and the one who managed to disable him so easily passed on. The girl asked what it was all about. She thought that such guys were fun to test, and they don't feel fear at all. It was fun for her, and the guy who sat next to her turned out to be Ruran, and apologized for his act, though he was to be thanked for it. The girl, who was a red dragon in reality, already realized that the man was angry that the objects had been destroyed, and only commented that he had had a lot of bad luck, and he replied that he wasn't that angry about it. Suddenly the door opened again, only now a lot more people came in. They apologized for the disturbance, and said they were brought here by some noise. It was the third Duke of the Ruran Empire, Melik Dulian, and he admitted that he had no idea that such scum still walked through his territory. He said he'd like to hear their plans soon. Allison and Rurin had ruined everything he'd heard, and the girl indignantly made a remark asking if they should at least say hello first, and then said it really wasn't easy, inviting the man to sit down. They'd called him for the plan anyway. Meanwhile, Rurin had a dream. She saw their Edison approaching her, and advised me not to spade happiness. She took that advice, and promised she would, and then with an awkwardness and embarrassment which caused her to blush, suggested that, it turns out, she might be frank to him. The guy replied that of course, and the girl in turn unbuttoned his shirt and asked again if she could be frank with him about everything. He answered that in everything, and the brunette began to throw off her clothes, under which there was nothing. They pressed against each other, embracing, exchanging the warmth of their bodies. They felt the beating of each other's hearts, as if they were intertwined into one. Suddenly the girl flipped. She found herself in bed, her heart pounding. She realized very quickly that it was a dream, but it did not cancel the way he was. The brunette flushed, as if it happened in real life. She was getting embarrassed by her own fantasies. She didn't realize where it was coming from in her head. She covered her eyes with her hands, and the monster next to her, who looked like a cat, took notice, cleaning the room.